you guys are selecting Merrick for your telehealth platform needs. They have a couple different ways that they go about doing this. The first is through a self-selected experience. There's a table talk panel, which is the full panel. That would be the panel that I personally get twice a year. That's checking everything. You name it, it's all there. The other panel is a checkup panel with a guided optimization. You're connected with a patient care coordinator, and the patient care coordinator will meet with you to determine what your needs are, thing to be able to help optimize your health or mitigate without judgment. So the discount code again is Table Talk Merrick Health for all your hormone optimization and performance needs.
Today's episode is brought to you by EliteFTS.com. Founded in 1998 with the primary aim to live, learn, and pass on. Please help Elite FTS support this mission by smashing the like button, leaving a comment, sharing with a friend, and thinking of us for your training needs. If you can put it in a gym bag or load weights on it, Elite FTS has it.
What's going on? I'm Dave Tate. We are broadcasting from the middle of the Elite FTS weight room, where the underground still thrives and you're part of the crew. It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. What's going on, guys? We're back with another episode of Table Talk. My guest today is Matt Wenning. There's no need for an intro. He's been a regular guest on the podcast, which I appreciate tremendously coming out. We talked a little bit a couple weeks ago about what you wanted to do on this podcast, recapped it a little bit beforehand, which I think is a awesome direction to go. Yeah. So we're going to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back in time and talk about origins of not just conjugate, but just periodization. Sure. And then kind of bring that into, where we are today. Mm-hmm. And because you just finished, and it's in the editing process, a book, which has been an interesting process as an outsider looking in, right? Because it's been about a year, right? Maybe a little more.
Yeah, I started the process of just collecting my own thoughts when I would do, other podcasts or talks or seminars, and started getting, things that where you like to have references if somebody had questions. Mm-hmm. So the thought process of the book was already in play years ago, because what I find is that the more you start learning, the more you can still know but forget. Mm-hmm. And so to have a lot of these old references and a lot of these old texts in a cognitive situation where you can dive back into those lost books and articles very quickly was always important for me for time saving. So to take those thoughts and put them all together and give people a structured and educational idea of how I got to where I'm at over the last 30 years, and meeting you guys and Louie and Verkashansky and Zatsiorski and all those guys, and putting it all into a usable format where no matter what the question was, you could show people what your thought process is either now or at that time when you were hitting those big numbers.
Which is, as the outsider looking in, it was something that I appreciated, because there's so many sources that you learn from, and being 10 years older, or whatever the fuck I am of you, like I'm going to say 20 years to make you look younger, right? And, I see the learning process that you're going through and the sources that you had to learn from, so there's the Russian manuals, and there's Charlie Francis's form. They're different forms. There's shit kind of everywhere, but not organized anywhere. And then watching you try to find it all or re-find it all because you have it, this was the best part for me. Not only find it all, but then like, where the fuck did they get it from? Like this is referenced or this is written about in this program and organization of the weightlifter or whatever, management of the weightlifter. Sure. But where's the citation for that?
And that's the problem with the Russian manuals, is that their citation styling was so much different than what we consider scientific now. They would just state a name and a date, but there was no book. And so then it sent you on this massive quest in a junkyard looking for the perfect part for your car that was made 80 years ago, roughly. Yeah. So it's like the book was like building Christine the car, where you're just grinding and smoothing and polishing and then digging more to find more parts that are not available anymore, because the shit that I went and found, I either had to come and find from you on books that you've had for years, the shit that Louis had back in the day, or the stuff I've collected over the last of being interested in it since the mid 90s. And that's when you start realizing, like, there really was no book, no matter who we knew, that you could take it and actually apply the knowledge in a broad scale. And I feel like no matter what you feel your periodization model should be or what your sport is, the information that'll be in the book coming out will be able to advance you in your thought processes and your training, because it's a way of thinking. It's a way of trying to find out that the problem that you're trying to solve is much more complex than what you think it is. Right? You know, everybody goes, well, you know, it's really complicated to fly to the moon. You're absolutely right. You got to understand gravity. You got to understand propulsion. You got to understand oxygen and how to breathe in a no gravity and all this other shit. The human body might arguably be more complicated to figure out when you start thinking of endocrinology, biomechanics, muscle fiber typing, the nervous system and how it fires muscles or not fires muscles. You start looking at all these different factors, you're like, this is a very complex issue, and it's not as simple as just walking in the gym and doing whatever the fuck you just copied off the internet.
Yeah.
And that's where I think I got really lucky, because that wasn't possible in our generation. When you wanted to get stronger, you went and outsourced someone else that had been there before you. When I came to you, you were probably a little bit younger than me now, maybe 5 years, 6 years younger, I think, if I remember correctly. Louis was still somewhat in his cognitive prime. You know, guys like Poliquin were still alive. Verkhoshansky was talking to me. Zasiorski was my adjunct professor's professor. So I had direct contact with him, which was in charge of all of the Soviet Union training from 1965 to like 87. That's when they did all their craziest shit. So for me, having those connections, actually, if you look back, it's the perfect time bomb for the amount of knowledge that I achieved. And I was just genetically gifted enough to have people like Louis allow me to come in and actually utilize this information, because we were talking earlier, I think the Russians wrote this stuff so complex. It's almost like when you go to Egypt and you're looking at hieroglyphs. You have to live it to be able to understand it when you read it. And now when I open those books, the context of the information is so much different, because I've applied it for so long. I understand exactly what they're saying. But when I was 20, just learning this shit, I was like, what the hell are they talking about? This doesn't make any sense. But as you start to live it, you start realizing, I see what they're saying now. And the hard part is, when the Soviets wrote books, they weren't writing text manuals for you and I to follow to get stronger. They were utilizing it to advance the science with their other professors. So the coaches at that level were so much higher educated, nearly professors, and some of them were PhDs, that when they were reading high level science and biology, they didn't need the context to understand what they were talking about.
No, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, so the information is just so much at a higher level. It'd be like, you know, asking Einstein about physics. You're going to get the right answer, but you're probably not going to understand it because your base knowledge is too low. And that's what I start to find is that, and it's not a crack on anyone new or even that just take this as a hobby, but the problem is that the question of how to get strong once you stop the beginner gains becomes a very complex situation. And the people that try to sell simplicity are literally selling you a bag of garbage. Because you and I both know when you get to that limit and you want to get better, that's when all of the shit's on the table, and it's no longer a simple equation of I just got to go work harder. Every fucking time I get on the internet and I see somebody say, you just got to train with more intensity than the next guy. Good idea if you want to be around for another year. But you're not going to be the best unless you can be around another 10 years.
And your form could suck, and your technique could suck, and you could be overtrained and not sleep. There's so many factors.
Well, now we just start talking about variabilities that nobody wants to look at. And again, it's why I hold the Soviet system in such high regard, because they controlled as much as they could of those scenarios, which we will never see again. Maybe China's doing it right now and some of the camps in Iran and things of that nature. But the real reason that, one, we don't win in Olympics in weightlifting, and two, we don't win in a lot of these developmental sports is because we don't have a developmental thought process in America. Everything is in 6 and 8 week waves. Everything is one off season. It's not looking at quadrennial plans like 4-year developments, right? When in reality, that if you want the body to change from a stressor, which is training, then you have to have a longer thought process, because that does not happen overnight. And if it does, it's probably dangerous and it's not sustainable.
Even as a young athlete, though, they were vetting that as young kids, because there's developmental phases, for explosive strength, visual acuity. I can't remember the exact years for each one of those things.
Some of those things, like balance coordination, are the highest developed between the ages of 4 and 8.
Yeah.
So if you want more information on that, just got to read a lot of stuff on Istvan Bali. And we studied a lot of him at IPI, my first big internship. And if I remember correctly, he has more people in the NHL than almost any coach ever in existence. But he starts them off at 4 years old, and it's not hockey. It's all kinds of different general athleticism type things. So if you read Developmental Approach by, I think that's what it's called, by Istvan, it'll break it all down into its simplistic terms. It's not too hard to understand, but it starts to open your eyes to how important timing is to being the best you can be, which the Soviets understood 80 years ago.
Doesn't Drabek have a book? Drabek.
Yeah, Drabek has a book.
One that's not as deep as what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But enough. And the only reason I'm pointing that out is, parents that have kids, sometimes they get overzealous because they got a garage gym and they want to have them go out and do all the wrong stuff.
Yeah, every kid that comes to the gym that I do assessments on and bring their parents, I send them a screenshot of the exact book that I want them to read. And when they come back, it's like you turn 5 light bulbs on in a dark room. Mm-hmm. You're like, holy shit, I didn't realize. I'm like, yeah, you're too specific, too fast.
So,
right?
With your notes, just to jump into that, because I don't want to get too far away from where I want this to go.
Sure.
You went back to, what was it, the 50s?
Actually, the early 1900s, late 1800s.
Yes.
Yeah. So to start it off, so I don't forget, because the notes were the book lays it out very straight, but I didn't want to cover everything.
Yeah.
And not because of the book, but because it
takes
just
too long.
Yeah, we'd be here for a year and a half. But Kravatsky was a doctor, but he was also very interested and into weightlifting in the late 1800s, early 1900s. He was helping with the formation of the first Olympic committee in Russia. But he also understood that you needed to tie in health with athleticism and strength. So he's starting to figure that out. And we're talking 1895 to 1910. Like what? Right? Mm-hmm. So when you start reading about Kravatsky, you're like, oh my gosh, this dude was a doctor that was into lifting and started the process of bringing of what medical systems had at that time to strength training. So already by the early 1900s, late 1900s or 1800s, early 1900s, the Russians were already starting a big boost in cognitive process of getting stronger. And that's when it becomes very, very noticeable that we were very far behind already. Mm-hmm. You fast forward into the 30s, they start writing texts on training. You start seeing in 1917 a book that breaks training into phases. So pre that time, around the 30s, the teens and 30s of the 1900s, most people just worked out or trained a specific sport for a couple of weeks and showed up to a contest. Yeah, literally. You start seeing this, and you start seeing phases of training, and you're like, oh wow, they're already understanding you can't do too specific too fast. And you need seasons and off seasons in order to peak your training in 1917 to 1930. And you're like, wow, right? I mean, it's almost like eerie that was 100 years ago. And then me and you still can't get fucking people to understand this shit, right? But if everybody starts there and understanding that you can't be in season all year long, you just saved yourself a ton of pain and lack of progress, just because you understand that you can't stay peaked all the time.
Well, I think what happens with a lot of people is the beginner gains fool them because it makes them think that
A to B gets you from B to C.
Yeah, because they can do that when they just start to a point, then it just stops. Yeah. Then it gets tough, and where that brings up that weird question is, do you ride that wave, or should it still be periodized? Personally, I think it's still be periodized because it can be a better wave over a longer period of time. But it's like everybody wants to try to go back and experience those same gains that they had the first time. So
it's kind of like a heroin addict. They always want that first high. Yeah. They always chase the first high. Yeah. You always chase your beginner gains. Yeah. And really it doesn't work that way. It comes up and then it flat lines out, and then the gains are not very fast. So there's a lot of different factors involved with that. But the reason that we don't see this education out very far is because by the time someone gets past those newbie gains, most people already quit.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, how many people we ran into in the first year and a half to 3 years, they're really into it, man. They're going to give everything they got. And then at year 10, oh, you quit lifting 7 years ago? Mm-hmm. Oh, man, I quit lifting, at 22. I'm 35 now. I'd like to start back. We can still get you strong, no problem.
Yeah.
But my point being is that I've heard that story a million times, and you've heard it 10 million times.
And those are only the ones that we've heard.
Yeah.
There's, way more that we've never heard of.
Right.
That go through the same process.
Right. And that's why I think you don't see this information out as much, because nobody wants the developmental mindset. Nobody wants to tell. I remember, and I've talked about this, I think, on our podcast before, but with you and I, but the biggest negative for most people was a positive for me was when Ed Cohen, because he lived only 2 hours from where I grew up, saw me squat 700 at 20 years old and goes, man, if you can hold on for another 4, 5, 6 years, you're going to squat 8. Wait a minute. 4 or 5 more years it's going to take me to get another 100 pounds. Now, don't get me wrong, I did it in 2.
No, I get that. I know what you're saying.
But I asked Eddie about that. We're still really good friends. I asked him about that, and he said, I wanted to see if you were in it for the long haul. Mm-hmm. And he was right. Like, that did not deter me. What that did is make me want to learn how to get there better, not faster. I didn't care if it took that long, because I love to train. I like to work out. So the secondary goal from that was to be good at competing. But if that meant that I didn't want to train anymore and I had to sacrifice, I'm going back to the training. Mm-hmm. Because if I feel like I don't work out and I'm not on a regiment, I have OCD about that. I beat myself up every day. Like, you didn't train, you're a piece of shit. Like, that.
Yeah.
And so I cannot give that up still to this day. And is why I still do shit you see on Instagram. I don't need to prove anything anymore. But the thing of it is, that's my life. That's how I grew up.
Yeah.
That's what I cannot let go, even no matter how much I have to modify it. And the point being is that if you are only in powerlifting or strength sports for competing only, your time to be able to do that at an elite level is marginal.
Yes.
And what you can give back to other people is even less than that. Meaning, like, if you're just a super freak that just knows how to get strong, but doesn't learn the right processes in order to do it, what good are you when somebody else comes along that doesn't have the same genetics? You're worth nothing. Mm-hmm. You're just a screamer. You're just a guy that brings energy, but you're not really bringing any content to the table, which means you're limited in what you can do for other people.
Yeah. If they may not want to do anything, there's that whole side too. But, if that is part to where they want it to become something for their whole life, or a career, whatever it's going to be, there's that longevity point that has to play into this as well, where it's interesting because the longer that we're in this, whatever you want to call it, this sphere, it's not fitness, it's not strength, it's all of it kind of combined. This industry, we'll just say this industry associated with lifting weights, that's how I'll define that. Yeah. Is over time, people who suck don't last. Mm-hmm. It's very cut and clear. It's very simple. Where they've only been around for a few years, it's like, and I remember Louis saying this, and I used to roll my fucking eyes, like, oh, we'll wait to see what they're doing 20 years from now. Mm-hmm. But he's kind of right, because when you look back, I see a lot of people that do some things I don't know if I necessarily would agree with, but if they're still getting progress from the people that, the demographic they work with, right? For 40 years, then
they know something.
Yeah. Right. And they probably know more than the people that are busting their balls that have only been doing it for a few years, but have really big lifts. Yeah.
It's to me, it's the time, the longevity is the real separator from everything. Mm-hmm. Right. And then what did you accumulate in that time, whether it be strength, education, coaching cues, it could be all kinds of different things.
It should be all of them. And
what you start to realize is it's all of them. Yeah. And everybody comes to the table with a different set of cards, and the way to make them better isn't always the same. And that's what is hard to sell to people in whatever aspect you want to sell it to, is that sometimes what's not in the gym is what's going to get you better. And some people just don't want to give that up, whether it be partying, drinking, bad relationships, poor sleep habits, bad nutritional habits, eventually those become the Achilles heel or the weak link in the chain. And then what ends up happening is you run other things into the ground to compensate, and then you run out of everything.
The thing that has always confused me is how hard it is to sell people on, say, quadrennials or longer term programs when they've already kind of gone through their whole life doing this. There's elementary school, which was 6 or 7 years. There's junior high school, which was 3 years. There was high school, which is 4 years. These are all things that they've worked for to achieve a desired end result, which took a quadrennial or 3 or 4 years to be able to have college degree,
PhD,
masters. See, they all take, like, here's this objective, here's what it's going to take, and in no time with anything that has value is that fucking 8 weeks.
No. And look, I mean, case in point, I just finished a goddamn book, and I felt like it brought more gray hairs than I've even had in school. It was like a master's degree times 100 in reality. Mostly because I wanted to impress guys like you. You know, I think anybody that gets a hold of the book is going to be like, oh, this is amazing. But is it amazing to Dave Tate?
Yeah.
This is the shit that the books that I borrowed from him. If I don't bring the amount of expertise that I feel I can to this text at 100 miles an hour and do my best, just like I did in lifting or whatever, I want Dave to feel that when he reads it. Mm-hmm. That's the drive, you know, and that's, I think a lot of people miss that. They don't, I'm not saying it's a comparison, and sometimes it can be a stressor, but putting that kind of pressure on yourself to be successful no matter what you're trying to do is important because it forces you to learn. It forces you to look at things in opposite directions. It makes you look at everything in a complete 360 degree angle. And I popped out of this book because I knew that my physical time to do crazy shit's limited, but my ability to display that information down and get all this stuff that we worked so hard to try to master our whole lives, to get that down in the text is more important than any of that shit.
No, I believe so, because it's the resources that you were pulling from. I mean, it's not like I have a Dewey Decimal System out here. You know, you got to go through a ton of shit that isn't good, you know, to find some things that have good things in it. And the internet's the same thing. I mean, you can search that and there's tons of shit.
The good and the bad about what I just wrote about in all reality is the internet hasn't poisoned it, because nobody has the time, energy, or the experience or the education to put those books that you have in your library or I have in my library. Those aren't on the internet. So a lot of these references that we're talking about are completely lost to the general population and probably will never get put in the internet. I wanted to bring those back and make sure that they weren't lost, because something that is forgotten is deemed to repeat itself. And the problem is that maybe we'll never have this long-term thought process ever again, but I don't want this information to be gone. It was everything we lived for, as far as what we build upon. Whether we knew we were doing it or not, we were pushing the envelope at Louie's place, my place when I left, your place when you started here. We're pushing that envelope, what the Russians left behind.
At what point did it start to formulate more of what I would call a periodized structure when you were going back through time? So it had an off season where you left off, like an off season and preseason, basically skill development and general development. When did it start to become more?
So science started in 1950s.
Yeah.
So, and I'll throw nearly exact dates out here is why I wanted to do this. 1956 Olympics was the first structured training symposium that utilized science, statistical data to make the athletes better that we know of, which is Medvedev. So Medvedev did that in the 50s. He brought statistical planning and equations into the training. And they did that with an eye opener to Paul Anderson. So Paul Anderson was doing a lot of really crazy training to win the Olympics. We've seen the pictures, of all seen it before that studied anything. He's squatting at different heights out of different pits. He's back squatting to get better at power cleans. He's doing all kinds of crazy lifts in a, maybe even not in an educated fashion, but he's not doing the same thing all the time. And so he would be the first godfather really of training, and the Soviets looked up to him to try to figure out, how is this guy so damn strong, and how do we make guys that strong over here? And they ended up surpassing him with Alexiev and the Dynamo Club. But 20 years prior, Paul Anderson was the catalyst to that.
So what was he looking at? Was he looking at the workload, the number of exercises, and
Yeah.
what are the metrics that he was looking
So the
at?
metrics were intensities,
Yeah.
percentages of 1 rep maxes. He's looking at how much volume can someone recover from in a day. He's looking at the durations of workouts and how many of those workouts can be even utilized. And at first was only once a day. I think they only trained about 3 times a week, if I remember correctly, Medvedev talking about, and saw extreme gains off of that, meaning like you can get really good with minimal time. You don't need to start at 6 days a week, because the Russians didn't even do that at first.
Yeah.
So that started, and then by the 70s, they had instituted a system, early 70s, they instituted a system of about 10 to 12 exercises to get good at the 2 Olympic lifts. And that was still very limited in what you would do, but it was very structured, and they had built champions on that in the 60s. So again, like most people, very hesitant to let go of something they know works, even if it's damaging and not the best. We've seen that a million times. So Alexiev comes along with Medvedev having all of these high educational degrees, and also Medvedev being an Olympic champion himself, realizing the stressors that Alexiev was going through in the old system. He realized that he needed variability, and that variation needed to rise. Now, some of this stuff I would have to literally look at my notes the entire time to go over, so I'm not verbatim. But the thing of it is so Alexiev was allotted, I want to say at first, about 15 or 20 guys that they created the Dynamo Club, and Medvedev left the traditional system and went to design the conjugate system for the Soviet Union for the 76 Olympics. And when that happened, the exercises at first went to 24, and then by the mid 70s, they were at 48.
I mean, how was that physically being implemented?
So what they would do is they would implement the non-traditional conjugate, or what they call piecemeal system, once the guys were close to or at master of sport. This is where it gets interesting, and I change my thought processes over the last 20 years. I do believe that if you have the right coaching, you had you or I or a Windler or a Louis in his prime standing around, I think you could use conjugate in the beginning and get very good results. But you and I, and even Louis, and even Windler, and even all the other guys we just said, all started off linear because it was easy to understand.
There's a base.
There's a base. We all started with a base before conjugate, and now I do believe that that is important because of the coaching that is around you when you start as a beginner. Not because the system's better. It's because you don't have the smartest people around you when you begin. Almost no one does.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up 2 hours from Eddie. That was pretty lucky.
Yeah.
I grew up 2.5 hours from Louis. That was pretty
But
lucky.
you're still not around them all the time.
I'm not around them every day.
Yeah.
I'm seeing small things, and Louis writing shit in PLUSA, and I'm like, faster to get stronger? What the fuck? You know, then Eddie's telling me, you know, hey, everything's about technique. It's not about intensity. You have to be perfect. So it's not just about going hard in the gym. You start getting all these little pieces that don't necessarily make a puzzle yet, but they're starting the process of laying the table down to gather the pieces to start making your own puzzle, right? Because everybody's going to start with different amounts of pieces, whether how smart they are or who they're around or how big the table is with how much shit's on it. I mean, that's just a euphemism or whatever, but you get my point.
No, I totally get it.
So this is when you start to see in the early 70s and the development of this conjugate piecemeal system of variety, you start to see these quadrennial plans being spoken of. About 68 to 73, almost all of the planning and the training in the Soviet and Eastern Bloc system was in 4-year blocks. And it wasn't just because of the Olympics. A lot of it was because they started seeing guys getting injured that were training too specific too often. Isn't that weird? We see that fucking today, don't we?
Yeah. Interesting how that
So
works.
that's how that works, right? So the Russians were like, well, that's a bad idea. So what you start to see is you start to see that they start understanding the steps and the needs. What we start to see is, and we see this all the time on the internet, people that come in and come to your Learn to Train seminars or come and contact me, they look at one, there's 2 major needs, but most people only think of one. The one need is that everyone thinks of is the need of the sport. I want to be a powerlifter. I want to be a football player. I want to be a basketball player. There's another side of that coin that is just as important, and that's the need of the athlete at that time. That's where it gets complex, because you might want to get faster, but if you're fucking weak, you're not going to. End of story. Why did Charlie Francis have Ben Johnson squatting 600 plus for a triple 4 weeks or so out from the 88 Olympics because his strength was his fucking weakness to breaking the world record in the 100-meter dash. And we could talk a little bit about that later, but you start seeing this variety system creating these athletic prownesses of all different types of ways, because there's not really contraction types that are being ignored in a proper system, or special strengths, what we like to call, and what Louis like to call special strengths, which basically just means don't avoid any part of the force velocity curve. If you need to get maximally strong, you still need explosiveness. You still need speed strength. You still need strength speed. All of them may play a different role at different times of the year and different points of your development.
Yes.
Right?
And the need to recover from it.
And that's where it gets real fucking crazy. And also why the conjugate, or at that time they called piecemeal system, was created, was because they had to figure out a way to maintain high, elite, master level volumes with the least amount of mileage. The only way to do that is to rotate the mode in which you train, because the exact same thing in the exact same place breaks two big laws. One, law of accommodation. If I do the same thing over and over again, the only way to get better at it is to do more of it or heavier of it. Well, there's a limit to that, both in time and recovery ability. Then the other thing is you have mileage. If I do the same thing over and over again constantly, it's the fastest way to get better, but it's also the fastest way to plateau and create injuries. If you have a system like the Soviets had, where they wanted hundreds of masters of sport in, say, Olympic lifting, why would you use a system that breaks everybody in one Olympic cycle? You can't get any data out of that, and therefore you can't learn anything from it to make the next generation better. Whereas we look at it as, hey, we're just going to worry about today or this week. Don't worry about how it affects 10 years from now, which is a big problem.
Well, for it to go and fall into what I call Western method of periodization, which I was first exposed to, and that off season just becomes hypertrophy training, so the other stuff just gets put on the back seat, which leads to detraining. Why not just do that instead of what they were doing?
Well, that's an amazing question. Well, I think they started to realize very quickly, because they had so many researchers and they could do so many tests, that if you stop training speed, you lose it. If you stop training maximum efforts, you lose it. Now, you can retain a base amount of gain, and you need to peak things at different times. But the point is, you still need to go and keep some things in maintenance range in order for it to not fall down and become the weak link. That's where it becomes very complicated on how to train, because you can't ignore one thing and attack another. You might take these down and minimize them, but the other thing, there's always a checks and balances area. And that's where conjugate started to realize that, hey, if we want this to happen, we have to maintain this while we work on this. You can't let conditioning go out the window and only focus on strength, because then eventually you can't recover. Yes. And the opposite is true as well.
Well, that's what we see happen a lot with strength athletes, is the opposite. The strength becomes, basically they do, how do I like to frame this? They do like one deload before a meet and realize, wow, I'm way stronger, so I'm just going to deload every 2 weeks and just always get stronger. Then they go on that process for like a year. Yeah. And then slowly their ability to maintain their basic conditioning threshold drops below their ability to recover, and they burn out.
I look at it and kind of explaining what you're saying is, like, if you look at a goal of periodization, right, is utilizing it to help prevent overtraining, overreaching, and regulate fatigue. But there was a comma when the conjugate system came in, and that was to not only help with overtraining and regulate fatigue, but also to not ignore any special strengths at that time. See, that's where the comma comes in, and that's when the paragraph gets extended. Because now conjugate goes, well, wait a minute, we can't just keep switching abilities. We need to maintain this other shit. And that's when it gets crazy. So you start reading the classic, Stone and Kramer's periodization models. Yes. There's not that comma and this.
Yes, so there's a drop.
There's a drop. Yeah. And that's where conjugate attempted, and I think did it very well. If you look at the 1984 Friendship Cup and the height of the Soviet powers of strength training, we like to tend to, in the West, and even a lot of the researchers at the time were guilty of it, were saying, well, they're just better because of drugs. In reality, they were better because they were fucking smarter than us.
I believe so.
End of story. The drugs were the same.
Yeah.
And if you really want to put the drugs on the pedestal, the Americans were taking fucking tons of shit, probably compared, at least it was equal. Let's just say it was equal.
Yeah.
You know, there's no secrets in the drugs, really.
No, it's an easy way to avoid the conversation.
And not act like you're a dumbass.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it'd be like, I don't know anything about cars, so I'm just going to go buy a brand new Corvette and put nitrous on it. But you're the tinkerer in the garage that understands everything about the engine, but you just can't afford that level of, you know.
Well, from what I see, where most people fuck up with the conjugate is when you're trying to maintain some physical abilities, right? They don't bring it to maintenance mode. They keep it too high, right? So they're trying to, they think they're maintaining, but they're actually in a way thinking that they're trying to peak all at the same time. And you can't do that. This is why you get the kickback to say, well, conjugate can't work because you can't push everything at the same time. And first off, it's a broad statement that probably I made and other people made, that we're not actually pushing everything.
It's not wrong what you're saying, but the problem is the hard part of the equation is that your thought process and your training to train everything at the same time becomes more optimal.
Yes.
And then optimal becomes not black and white, and then the gray becomes so fine. You're right on the line of doing shit too much, but you're not. And you're still getting better from it. And the problem is, as you get better, and as you start realizing more you know, that gray area gets smaller and smaller. So like when I was squatting 1,200 in gear, I had no room for error in how much I was training, because I could overtrain like that and I could get weaker like that. So everything had to be optimal. The problem is when that equation becomes that difficult and now it's not basic math, it's fucking algebra, everybody quits. Or they just get injured because they keep pushing too hard. They don't want to start reading and dissecting any of this. They think that there's an easier way to do something. In reality, it's very complex to understand how all of this works. And I still don't understand all of it. It's just very interesting to me to read this to you and realize that I've lived it and I've learned it. And then the hard part is you're trying to help somebody on page 10 that needs to start on page 1.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I'm trying to formulate in my head is when they're advanced strength athletes, that room for error, raw or gear, it's small, very small. Now in the off season, it's a little bit bigger. Most people who are listening to this think that's them, and I'm going to come straight out and say it's not. Right? Where outside of that realm, as you said, the gray area, it's bigger. There's a lot more room. But I don't think they're paying attention to what those attributes and what that room is.
No, and I tell you, like when I was at Westside, you know, Greg Panora was king shit. You know, Chuck was still somewhat in his prime, squatting close to 1,200 at 260 body weight. I mean, we had some heavy hitters. Vlad was there. I wasn't better than those guys. I was just maybe this much, well, some of them. I outsmarted those numbers. I would say that I'm one of the only people in my generation that actually smarted myself to that strong, because I probably shouldn't have been able to do any of that. But I was so cognitive of trying to learn this and do it the best way I could that I felt like I skated in that gray line, which caused a lot of riff between Louis and I, because I figured out what I needed and that wasn't in Louis's ideal.
Yeah.
You know, and so I leave Westside and my total goes up 200 pounds doing literally the same ideals with understanding the 360-degree picture that I needed more recovery.
Which is, you know, it's, if there's any takeaway that I've had since being on the internet from the first day, is everybody has to figure out their own ideal, but they also need to become more educated to be able to figure out what that even means, right? Because it's always easy to say you need to find what's most optimal for you, but that's always going to be based upon what you know. Yeah,
and what you did in the past that maybe you weren't cognitively aware of.
Yeah.
My bench went up really fast, and it was, I would consider, my genetically most gifted lift because I was a really good swimmer when I was a kid, but because my legs were broken and swimming didn't hurt my legs. So I trained swimming hard because I wanted activity, and running and jumping killed my ankles and my knees because I had that car accident and it took forever for them to heal. You know, I was on, I can't remember, another podcast at some point, but I was talking with someone else, and my mom was telling me, we were talking about this not even that long ago on the phone, and she's like, when you went your first year to play t-ball, she could hear my legs cracking in the stands, trying to run. Think about that shit. Then 15 years later, you squat world records.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I had to outsmart all of that. It wasn't just a willpower thing. It was like, I cannot train like a fucking idiot like these other guys can. I need to do it in a smarter way.
It was also your passion too.
Yeah.
You know, so that plays into this whole
Well, that
thing.
was the thing is like, you know, my passion, I loved lifting and I wanted to be the strongest I could be. World records were not really in the mindset. What the mindset was is that one day I wanted to be able to sit at a table like this and talk to a guy like you and have your respect. What strength level that was didn't matter to me. But what mattered to me was the fact that I was willing to put the work in, not have the best cards, and outsmart it, and then have something to offer somebody else instead of just saying, well, you know what, you just got to be a Larry Wheels.
Well, that's why I'm saying it's your passion was for the powerlifting, but I've known you a long time. Your passion's been for education ever since I fucking known you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I don't think a lot of people really get that.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like this is not made up. I mean, you did this book because you wanted to do you didn't have to do the book. Fuck, it's a year and a half. It's not. I know I don't know the material, but I've looked through all the material. This is not an easy fucking undertaking.
No.
But that's to me, it didn't surprise me at all when you said you were going to do it. Because you're always doing something, have always been doing something. It's just the next logical. To me, it's like, oh, fuck, it's either that or a PhD.
Yep.
You know, at least
And
this way he's not spending money.
Trying to get it counted for both, right? And mostly just to have the thing behind my name. I knew it wasn't going to help me. I wasn't going into academia. But this was, you know, when I graduated with my biomechanics degree, that was arguably the hardest university to even get accepted into for that program. You're talking Dr. Kramer, Dr. Newton, Dr. Volek. I mean, these guys are heavy hitters for the last 30 years in research. They're not bringing on shitheads. And I wasn't the smartest guy, but I was the most applied with smarts.
Where would, because I did ask this a little bit earlier, and it will kind of go back to this.
Sure.
I don't want to say where did he get lost, because I don't want to discredit his knowledge, because he knows his shit.
Sure.
But he knew all this stuff, but yet he was a huge proponent of the classic hypertrophy, strength, peak, power.
Dr. Kramer.
Yeah.
That's a very hard one to answer. I think some of it was generational. So he's 20 years older than you.
Yeah.
Maybe more.
Yeah.
So I think there's that part of him.
And that's I agree, because that was revolutionary back then.
That was insane.
Yes.
You know, you figure he was in his prime in 73 and he was starting to write shit in about 80.
Yeah.
So you look at the timeline, that kind of makes sense. The next thing that makes sense, and I'm not busting balls, but the next thing that makes sense is he was in fucking academia. If he would have been applying that to the highest level Olympic athletes at the USOC and they was listening to him, he would have found out really fucking fast that wasn't the way to do it. But instead, he was writing texts and he was doing research. And I'm not saying it was wrong. All I'm saying is it's the applicable of knowledge. Louis knew what he knew because he had guys like us that were willing to fucking die to experiment with those methods. And so he had something tangible that average person, even a professor, couldn't have, which was, you got 6,000 pound squatters you can try that with. Kramer never had that.
Yeah.
He's teaching a class.
Well, and the fact is it was working, you know,
Yeah.
and we just literally said a little bit ago, this is a base builder.
Yeah.
Too.
And I think when he was an adjunct professor with Dr. Zatsiorsky, you know, I've never really talked to him about it, but I can imagine. I think that Zatsiorsky's level of smarts was so far beyond what anybody was talking about in the strength realm in America in the 90s that I think Zatsiorsky probably just stepped back and did teach Kramer that stuff. But think about how frustrated you and I get trying to get people to train smarter. Mm-hmm. Imagine that you're in charge of all of the Central Institute of Physical Culture in Moscow, every sport, and you come to America and nobody fucking listens. I mean, it would just break my mind. I mean, now that I'm older, I can kind of separate myself and not care as much.
And he probably didn't. I mean, at that point, he's like, what's the point?
Yeah, you're in your 50s or 60s.
Yeah.
You've already proven that you know what you're doing. You probably have, I'm guesstimating 350 world records under your belt. You don't give a shit. Yeah. Don't listen. But here's the information. Again, here's my book.
Yeah.
You don't want to follow conjugate, don't. But if you think that you're smarter than the last 100 years of people coming before you, it's your fucking problem. Yeah. Right?
When did the exercises move to 100? You know, so when did it start to bump up through?
That's interesting because what I see in that is about 86 is when Medvedev starts talking about having it over 75 to 100. Where I saw the 100 number was Tudor Bompa, which was a throwing coach, which you know. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm sorry, Bondarchuk. Bondarchuk came along with his books and started talking about 100 different exercises for the hammer, the shot, etc. And so I think he elevated it because he was a coach a little bit longer. But Medvedev started talking about 70, 90, 100 exercises around 86. Now, if we remember in 84, the Russians did not come to LA for the Olympics. They did the Friendship Cup with their own Eastern Bloc countries, and every Olympic record was broken at that time, which sucks that happened politically because, I mean, obviously America didn't want the Russians to come over and take all the records.
Yeah.
So I think some of that had to do with that. They knew they were behind. So I don't know. It's just that you see that variation start to happen about 86. And then unfortunately we start to see the Soviet Union and the communist bloc countries that were funded to do this type of shit started to lose their economic status and their countries. So by 90, 91, all that shit was falling apart. The East Germans got a hold of a little bit of it. The Cubans got a hold of a little bit of it. Verkhoshansky moved to Italy. Zasiorski came over to the United States. And the system's basically depleted. And that's why you started to see Boroshenko, and I'm not busting their balls either, but you start to see these guys, this is Russian programming. No. Russian programming was shit that the average person never even got to see because all those guys are either dead or gone. And even the athletes at that time probably didn't even know what they were doing. The program was written because they had hundreds of researchers sitting there writing it, so they didn't have to learn. I mean, how many guys did we train with at Westside had no fucking idea what we were doing?
Yeah.
So I'm sure it was a very similar process, even though they were training smart. They didn't know the whole ins and outs of it because they're focused on not trying to fucking die.
Well, the pushback would be the reason why it hasn't expanded is because of the early specialization in the drugs.
Yes.
Right. So the counter to both of those, I think you already kind of countered the drug thing. Like it's being used all over the place.
Yeah, it didn't matter.
That doesn't really matter.
I mean, if we want to go back to the steroids, I mean, really, the Germans are responsible for that. The first inclination that anybody was using anabolic steroids was Nazi Germany. They made them in 1936, 37, and they were using on stormtroopers to increase aggressiveness. So how long had they been in sports? Did Babe Ruth fucking use them?
Yeah.
I don't know.
You don't know.
But possible. They're around. And if they're around, right, people are going to fucking find out and do them if they can get a little edge on people. So I'm not saying I don't want to take people's great-grandparents as idols away from them.
I get it, but
you get my point. Hank Aaron and all them were all in those eras where they could have used shit, and then all of a sudden Mark McGuire's an asshole. Like, come on now, easy. You know what I mean? So that's something to really think about. You know what I mean? But I think you start to realize that everything started to change in the training protocols around the globe, not even including conjugate, when we started understanding stress and adaptation response from Hans Selye and the gas theory. Once that happened in the early 50s, 56, you see periodization hammer.
See, that gets interesting to me because I learned that when I was in college, right? But I didn't really learn it.
And you didn't learn how that applied to anything.
No, fuck no. I just learned what it was, you know, and interestingly enough, I mean, you're trying to think this through, you know, with the way I was training and so forth.
Yeah.
But it's such a prime component of periodization when you go back.
Well, it goes back a little bit farther back for us too. So in the 40s, there was a guy named Dr. DeLorme, and he worked for the U.S. Army, and he was trying to help rehab patients and bring their strength back after maybe like a bullet graze wound, where you're not going to be debilitated your whole life, but you do lose some strength after surgery, or if you maybe have to wait around 8 weeks and want to build it back up. That was when linear periodization, the pyramid model, was created. And I think because it was created by an American doctor, that system was very hard for the beginning positions of periodization in the American to let go, because that's where it started. You know, so it's heritage. Whereas the Russians didn't care so much about heritage, they cared about results. And they had way more resources and way more money and way more researchers studying something that we should have been studying. And it all came back down to math. What I mean is, if we go and look at every sport in Olympics, how many of them are anaerobic and how many of them are aerobic? And if you start doing medal counts, including weight classes like Olympic lifting, shot put, javelin, hammer, high jump, I don't need to keep going on and on, but you get my point. Why wouldn't you study anaerobics if you wanted to appear to be the strongest country in the world? You would. That's the whole reason why they did it, is they wanted to show that their system was better than democracy. And one way to do that is to win all the fucking medals, to show that we have more discipline, we have more research. You guys are just training in the dark ages, which we were.
So for those that don't know, explain gas, explain it.
Basically, when the body is shown or experiences a stressor, it has an adaptation to that stressor, depending on the severity and the length of the stressor. So again, law of accommodation, let's bring it back down to training. If I squat 5 sets of 5 for 2 fucking years straight, twice a week, the first 6 months I'm going to get stronger at it, and then it's going to flatten out because the stimulus didn't change, didn't increase, didn't get any better. I'm saying if it was the same weight, same rest periods, there's all kinds of things you can change, but it's really easy to understand that 5 sets of 5 will only work for so long. You got to shorten the rest periods, you got to increase the weight, you got to do tempos, you got to change positions, fucking bars, or whatever. But the point is if it's the same bar and the same weight and the same structure, after about 3 weeks, it's no longer going to be as efficient as creating a result. That was the first explanation of that, was Selle's gas syndrome, or whatever you want to call it. So that's where they started to realize, well, hey, training is this fucking stressor. How do we make it more optimal? And that's when the gears started to turn.
And that's, to me, that's where it gets very interesting, because when you're looking at adaptations, there's stressors from all factors. There's muscle fiber stressors, there's mental, there's nervous system, there's all these.
Let me go over my notes, because I have all of them laid out for you. It's actually really interesting because we only think of muscle, right?
Most, yes.
So let's go here. There's actually 4 areas of stress. Periodization attempts to control some, if not all of these, if done in the proper range, i.e. barracks, control, nutrition, sleep, blah, blah. Physiological, right?
Yep.
So that's our body's hormonal system, all this other shit that you're starting to talk about.
Yeah.
Behavioral. Yeah, behavioral stress. So how much of behavioral stress did we get introduced to being around Louis?
Just cultural. Okay. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, just you're
social,
walking in.
Yeah. So are you talking social or psychological, or are those two different?
Could be all kind. We have emotional as well.
Yes.
But behavioral might be, say, we walk in and we have these certain ways that we're supposed to act at Louis' gym.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
We felt that. Emotional stress. So now I walk in, I know Dave Tate's going to tell me my triceps are fucking garbage.
Yeah.
So now I'm stressed out about it. That's emotional. It's somewhat behavioral as well. Those are kind of tied together, but emotional stress is another one. Then we have structural stress. Why did your bone break? Why did you break your hip when you squatted?
Yeah.
Why did your knee blow out? Because you did knees over toes. You know what I mean?
No, I get it.
But you get my point. You have structural stress as well, which is muscle tension.
Yes.
So think about, you have 4 major areas of stress, and most of us only focus on, well, what about that squat? Well, what about I had to work 10 fucking hours? What about I didn't get to eat, every 3 or 4 hours? What about I didn't hydrate correctly because it's 100 degrees outside? Factors, again, that you have to be aware of. So we have 4 areas of stress that thing can be applied to, and all of them do have some factor in your training. Right?
Oh, yes.
But how many of us are thinking about any of that shit?
I would like to think everybody, but I'm wrong. Right? Because it's people that I've been around have to think about all those, and it's, I've always broke it down easier and say that every weak point is either physical, mental, or technical. Yep. And most people want the physical answer.
Oh, exactly right.
What exercise do I need to do to increase my bench?
Yeah.
Well,
so what was funny is when you start seeing this variation of mode, you start seeing these people like Verkhoshansky, Tatian, and Kodikin start talking about how multiple methods create a better long-term result than specific methods too fast. Actually, the actual quote is, different means and methods because of law of accommodation and the gas syndrome. Theory on adaptation was showing significantly greater effect than contemporary loading schemes when utilizing a varied training method. I mean, so if you just want to take, I don't know who Tatian is or Kodian. I know those guys, I've seen a lot of their work and different stuff, but Verkhoshansky was by far and away one of the smartest guys to ever live in strength training. And if he's saying that, dude, I mean, automatically that should be step back. It's not as easy as being specific all the time. And that shit came from 1966. Fuck.
Yeah.
60 something years ago, and we're fucking still fighting this on the internet.
Well, specificity is always interesting to me because of how it gets defined. You know, I've said this a million times on the podcast, but you know, in powerlifting they'll talk about a comp lift, and I'll say, well, how do you define that, right? Because to me, you have to take it out of the rack, walk it out, squat, you get a squat command,
Sure,
and then rack command. That's a comp lift. So as soon as you do a double, you're already a couple deviations away from what a comp lift is. So how many deviations are we allowed to go where
before
it's
it's
still
not specific, or it is still specific?
Yeah, I know, and that's just specific of a movement pattern.
I calculate specific in my wheelhouse. Is it the exact same foot? Let's just say squats.
Sure.
Is it the exact same foot placement? Is it the exact same position on my back? I.e., am I doing it high bar, low bar, wherever I may like it to be? And is it with a straight bar with actual weight? That to me is a comp lift.
Yeah.
Now the rep range could stay, you know, for variation purposes, 1 to maybe 5. Once I say you get above 5, it has no bearing.
Yeah.
Right. But 5 can still make a 1 strong. Mm-hmm. You can work 5s and singles will still get better. I mean, Eddie based most of his training on all that. We can't really argue with 75 world records. But the point being is, like, specificity could mean all kinds of different things. Do you wear your cleats today? Do you have all your pads on when you're practicing? Those are sports specific type things. So it can depend heavily on what your sport is and what you're defining as. But as a conjugate powerlifter, straight bar, straight weight in the exact same position that I do a competition lift. If those 4 things are locked in, I consider that a competition style analysis.
Yes.
Would you agree?
No, I would agree 100%. You know, what I like is it's defined. You know what it is.
Yeah.
Most people don't.
Right.
Right. But they'll bitch, you know, to other people to say, well, that doesn't have any specificity. And, you know, it's like, what are we talking about?
Yeah.
Because are we talking about contraction mode?
Because there's all kinds of exercises that have squat type muscular reaction or actions to it that aren't necessarily a comp lift. A depth jump is a squat.
Yeah.
But it's not a fucking comp squat.
But what if specificity is only time under tension? We can do anything.
Yeah, so
with the
6
same
to
time under
9
tension.
seconds.
Yeah, we can do anything.
So if we do something, and that brings up a really good point, actually, because it's also why you have to be focusing on time. So, you know, that Midwest Kong, the big black guy that's got 80-something reps at 225?
Yeah.
He came to my gym, and he's like, man, I can't get over 75 reps. Now, I've been at 62, so I don't know nothing about 75. But what I do know is this. What are you doing for accessories? Well, I do this, this, and this. He was pretty smart with his training. He wasn't doing his accessories long enough. So I upped it 15 more seconds. You know what he had? 10 more seconds of work. He did 84. I just upped his time, see, to make his progression go higher. But I'm thinking at it from a completely different scenario. He's thinking, well, if I do tricep pushdowns, I'm getting my triceps stronger. Are you doing it in the same time range that you need? Because 225 for reps is very different than benching 600.
Well, I think that plays into all strength, though, right? Because you're only going to be able to strain on it. If you can only strain on a deadlift for 5.4 seconds, but you end up having to pull for 7, you're fucked.
You're not making it.
Yeah. So maybe you train with bands to get it to 7 or maybe even 8. Now you don't have to get no reason to get it to 12.
Yeah. Or
you know?
if you don't have access to those things because you're a broke ass crybaby, maybe you do things like tempos.
Yes. Yeah.
Now you do an 8-second deadlift. You take somebody that's super strong at deadlift, like a 600-pound deadlifter, and you make them pull 500 and take 6 seconds to take it to the top. It's not any fucking easier.
Yes.
Because you can't use any stretch reflex. So is that person heavily stretch reflex utilization, maximal strength utilization? What is the puzzle piece that's missing that you can plug in and it will get better? So if we shorten that up, Kong's bench needed to increase because his GPP wasn't high enough. Period. End of story.
Yes.
As soon as he fixed that small little piece, his fucking reps went from 75 to like 85.
That's a huge difference. Yeah.
It's insane. It's like 10%. 10% for one piece of the puzzle. Same workout, same layout. Now you just do this shit for time versus sets of 10.
Well, the reason I put this out there is one of the dings on conjugate is the lack of specificity with max effort work.
That's where I think I fixed it.
Yeah.
And you've seen my programs. We've talked a lot. In a competition mode, what you would do is you need to follow both laws, accommodation and specificity. They're equal. And even at a prime level, the problem is you cannot overdo the specificity. So how do you do this? You use the specificity lift, the barbell straight back squat, as your assessment tool and percentage guide. So, and I'm just throwing shit out there. Week 9, I will do 75% for 5. I'm seeing what kind of breaks, because at the 5th rep, it's 75% of close to 900 at that time is a fucking monster. It's like 715 for 5, right? And what's going on in that 5th rep? Is my back starting around a little? Are my knees not pushing out? Well, it could be all kinds of things. For me, it was very little. But if there was something that I felt or something that I saw in the video, the next 2 weeks were devised in order to fix that problem in that muscle group. So if my upper back was rounding, for example, a little bit, safety bar for 2 weeks. Because now, if I don't use my hands on the safety bar, my upper back has to work so hard to hold that weight. When I go back to the straight bar, I will not round. So then I do 82% for 4 or 3, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
But now I've tuned it. What's the next point? Fix that 2 weeks with heavy shit. Then hit 91% for a double, and then take a 2-week deload, about 10, 14 days, go to the meet, squat a PR. So see, it's variation with spurts of specificity.
Yeah.
Fucking game over. And it's been in the powerlifting manual for 5 years, and, you know, I can't make it any more simple. You have the law of specificity is followed but not overdone, and the variation is attacked by using your particular weaknesses that you feel are holding that specific lift back, and you're fixing it in a 14-day cycle before re-attacking and peaking the specific lift.
Now, if I see a breakdown in a lift, and I see it can be one of two things. And for an advanced lifter, it is always it's the strength, right? It's one of two. But for most people, it's one of two things. It could just be the activation, where they just are not activating, right? Or it could be a strength issue, where I'll address the activation thing because I can start it that day. You know, because it's just high rep shit that you're going to throw beginning and end of workout, whatever it's going to be, and then each workout until they do it again. Yeah. And then if it's corrected, it's like, okay, they just forgot how to fucking keep their lats tight, or they don't know how to keep the shoulder blades where it's supposed to be. Now, if it's not fixed, then it's what you're talking, like, how can this, I hate that, right? Because now you got to think. It's like, fuck, now how can we make this stronger?
So if I'm a conventional puller and I can't get my hips through the top, I might switch to sumo for 2 weeks, fix that, use straps, keep my hands cooled off, give my central nervous system a little bit of a break while I'm working on that, maybe even in a deficit if it's off the floor. Then I come back to my straight bar pull and it's fucking gravy. Yeah. Because I fixed that problem with a heavy fucking lift, but in a position that forces those weaknesses to have to play the role at a higher level.
Thus becomes the tricky part of conjugate, because it's reactive. Like it still needs to be, this is where I think people get confused. There still has to be a long-term template. Yeah. But it has to be reactive in application.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing of it is that for most people that are listening to this that are might be beginner or intermediate, is don't flip the fuck out that you don't have a professional doing that. What you need to understand is, if I can make some general statements, no lifter I've ever seen in the first 10 years that they train have enough glute and hamstring activation ever. Right? The reason that I don't like quad dominant squatting is because everybody knows how to turn their fucking quads on. When you learn how to use your posterior chain to do shit, that's when you get berserker strong. The next thing is almost everyone doesn't have enough core bracing or lower back strength to be able to accomplish what their legs can do. Have you ever seen somebody's back was stronger than their legs the first 10 years that they trained? Their back always gives out first. Then upper body posture, scapular muscles, because we usually start training it when we first begin, everything we see in the mirror, and we think that pecs and front delts is going to make our bench super strong, when we don't realize it's the brakes on the other side that's inhibiting any of that shit from turning on maximum. You start getting that upper back posture super strong and those shoulder blades heavily connected into your benching, and then all of a sudden you don't have a fucking bench technique issue, and now you know how to press. So my point being is, if you get your upper back strong, you focus on the muscles you cannot see in the mirror, and you make sure that your quadricep to hamstring ratio is as close to 1-to-1 as you can possibly get, and you get some glutes firing and your abs super strong, and that's the focus of your warm-ups and your accessories, the main lifts will get better no matter what the fuck you do, as long as you're patient. The rest is genetics. How fast you get strong off of that is how good your genetics are. I would say that's 92% correct. Would you agree?
Well, yeah. When it comes to the main movements, though, the max effort movements.
Mm-hmm. What level are we talking at?
And see, this is where the caveat comes in, right? So let's first we got to define beginner, intermediate, and advanced, right?
Yeah.
So beginner is going to be somebody that's never lifted weights before, right?
Yeah, or I would say the first 2 years.
First 2 years.
The first 2 years, because and beginner may also include previous sporting activities. If I bring in you seen that girl Marley that I've been helping?
Mm-hmm.
She just pulled 400 at 13 years old. She just benched 220 at like 140 body weight at 13 years old. She was a really good gymnast and an amazing softball pitcher before she touched weightlifting. I remember her telling me that her dad, because she wanted to lift with her dad when she was even younger than that, her dad wouldn't let her, so she had to do 100 body weight squats with perfect form and 100 push-ups and 100 sit-ups like every day for the last 5 years because her dad wouldn't let her lift weights. The story was something like that, which was actually a good idea. She already had a base of technique.
Yeah.
So now all I had to do, because her dad knew the technique pretty well, all I had to do was just up the intensity and put resistance on her. And there was no teaching involved other than small little torques. Because when I said she came to my gym and her wrists were rolled back a little bit and her elbows were not doing what I thought they should have been doing. And she wasn't keeping her back tight. So I moved her hands in a little bit, straightened her wrist, and locked her back in, and she fixed it in an hour. That's not a fucking beginner.
No, that's not a beginner at all.
So sometimes beginner is how well you can be coached, or i.e. your athleticism base.
Yeah.
That to me is intermediate, beginner, or advanced.
No, yeah, that's why it's hard to define.
You can't define it in lifting. You have to define it in how coachable is an athlete based on what their athletic prowess is.
Yes.
And then you can go to beginner, intermediate, or advanced training methodologies. But in reality, as an athlete itself, what's the athlete category? Then we can look at powerlifting or whatever.
Yeah, or their ability to maintain posture on the heavier lifts.
Yeah, if you say, hey, I want to be a good powerlifter, and then I see you jump and you got a 6-inch vertical.
Yeah.
You're not going to be a good powerlifter.
I mean, if you fall apart every time you strain, there's a problem too.
Yeah, you can't start there.
Yeah, you can't.
So yeah.
Okay, so let's put that caveat in there. They have to have the ability to be an intermediate. They have to have the ability to be able to strain with a max effort type of exercise with no more than 90%, no more than 20% breakdown of form or technique.
And if they do get 20% breakdown, they can be fixed in a session, not a year.
Yes. So that would be that. So if we're talking the beginner, that's simple. Get to be the intermediate, right? Develop that structure, and then that can be done in a multitude of different ways. Now that intermediate is where we'll talk in as far as the number of max effort exercises to rotate through.
So I think I'd have to go back into my book on that because I wasn't prepped to go through that, but I can give you a basic guidelines of what I would recommend and what worked for me, and then what I saw as I started putting the pieces together. Now the numbers may not be perfect, but you'll get the idea.
Yeah.
As a beginner lifter, for 3 lifts, you need about 8 to 10 exercise rotations. That doesn't necessarily include like hamstring curls and shit. I'm talking like some squat variations. I'm talking total. So you got three or so deadlift variations that you fuck around with. You got 3 or so bench press variations, maybe narrow grip, wider grip, and a board press or something, or a floor press. I'm just making up ones. And then you got 3 squats. You got like a straight bar, regular comp squat. You got a high bar and maybe a safety bar. I'm not talking bands and chains or no shit.
Just simple,
Simple shit. But you rotate those all the time so that you can train at a fairly decent rate. The intermediate would go about double those exercises. You'd go about 6 different squats, 6 different benches, and 6 different deadlifts. Again, that only applies if the beginner stage is starting to stagnate and you're not getting any better from those major lifts. You can keep it simple longer as long as you're not sensing mileage. So meaning, if those 3 squats, those 3 are rotating and your knees feel great and your back feels great and you're still making progress, stay fucking there and just let it keep growing you. But most people, after about 20 months, those 3 variations are going to start causing stagnation that I've seen.
Yeah.
So then I would go to 6 different types of squats. At advanced, I have upwards of about 25 to 30 different variations, but they're selected based on what I see as far as what I think my structural weaknesses are at that time or the environment that I'm in. So if I'm at elite today training and I have everything in my wheelhouse to train with, the exercise selection could be slight different than if I'm at a local gym and I don't have a whole lot.
Yeah.
So that becomes the other factor as well. But in a general rule of thumb, I would say 3 different exercises for the squat, bench, deadlift in the beginner. Intermediate, about, so I'm sorry, let me go back again. You have 9 to 10 exercises for squat, bench, and deadlift total as a beginner. Then you'd have around 20 as intermediate, and then you'd have as many as you wanted as an advanced guy.
Yeah.
Because you're hopefully by that point your education level is high enough to understand what to select, and also exercises that maybe I'll give you an example. Exercises that got me to a 565 raw bench, I had to heavily modify to get me to 611. They weren't the same.
No, I get that.
But there's only 10% difference, but the 10% difference was a lot more complex because I was at genetic limit. You know what I mean? So the amount of variation I had to trick my body to get stronger and keep away from getting injured was much more complex from 560 to 611. That's where it becomes very important why Medvedev's research was so potent, was because not only was he an Olympic medalist, he was also a PhD. So he knew when Alexiev was starting to hit a wall, how to switch it before it even started, because he had the lab experience of training at that high level.
I think there's a mental component there too, because if you're the intermediate, the PRs on these lifts are going to mean more.
Mm-hmm.
If you're an advanced, I get criticized for this. But if you're an advanced, the PR on a max effort lift should not matter at all, right? Because you know it's about more than that. It's a stimulus,
stone.
and it's trying to fix things.
What it does to me as an advanced lifter, and I can vouch for exactly what you're saying. As an advanced lifter, a PR and a max lift means that my accessories and my warm up and my timing of training have been optimized. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean jack shit about the number. What it means is that all of this shit that I've been putting together to make sure my body is adapting correctly and periodizing correctly is proving itself. But it doesn't mean that number means anything, because it doesn't mean a fucking thing until I step on the platform and do it in front of judges.
Yeah. Or if you're no longer, because there's those that don't compete, if you're no longer competing when you try to test yourself for whatever you're training for.
Sure.
You know, if it's your squat for reps.
I truly believe, and like I said, maybe this is an elite thing. How in the motherfuck can I hit a PR that I hit 6 years ago weighing 310? The only thing I've been able to do now that I think I couldn't do when I was competing was squatting that 520 for 24. That's just because I was in better shape, and 520 isn't shit to me. As far as putting it on my back, I don't care. But my point being is, like, if you truly push yourself in your prime, there's no fucking way you're going to hit those numbers at 55.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. But that means that the training isn't always about the number. It's about being able to stay on the fucking train tracks.
Yes.
That's all it becomes once you're out of your prime. Stay on the train tracks and don't accumulate more mileage.
Yes.
You will stay strong, and you will be stronger than everybody else. But comparing yourself to what you were at an elite level, and I think we only hear those questions from people that maybe didn't go to that point when they were 25 to 35 and give everything they had. I do not miss being able to squat 1,200.
Yeah.
And I'm not ever going to fucking try it again. Sorry.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That time in my life is gone. And I think the people that you see, they never push their genetics to the full potential. Now they're past that point, and they want to see more PRs. And then now all their training is driven with PRs, when it should be driven on reducing mileage and maintaining health with strength.
With strength.
Yeah,
I mean, if you take the strength out,
it's not, you're not healthy. If you're weak, you're not healthy. Why do we use, there's studies out now that's been out for a while, grip strength heavily associated with mortality. Strength is a health concern. And it is a big problem that we have right now. I mean, dude, it's agitating and depressing to go out in public. Because I'll give you an example. 2018, I went to my 20-year high school reunion. How do you think that felt? I still look, I'm stronger than I was at 18 at 43. Now, that goes back to, well, you just said you can't be your best. I wasn't at my fucking prime at 18. I was at my prime at 35 because I trained smart. So my point being is, I go back and it's like, everybody looked 20 years older than me. They were completely out of shape. It was fucking brutal. And I'm like, oh my God, you know? Because you still, like, when I see myself in the mirror, obviously I'm older. I see myself in the mirror, like, I took good care of myself. I feel good. And I look around, I'm like, oh my God, right? It's like, it's brutal. So my point to all that being is, like, don't get caught up in PRs. PRs are amazing, but they should only mean that your training is going well, and you have to compare yourself to the pond you're in now and not the pond you were in 20 years ago.
Yeah. The question that I get asked, and it came up on our to score to SQL. So usually it comes from, masters lifters, and they're being told that after a certain age, they shouldn't be doing heavy singles and stuff like that. And to some point I agree, and to another point I disagree.
I'm the same.
Right? Where it's this one, everything depends. For me, I have a higher chance of getting hurt doing a heavy set of 5 than I do a single. I've been doing singles since I was 13.
Because your technique's going to break down at 5, not 1.
Yes. So I know that. But now when I did all that bodybuilding shit for 4 years and didn't do any heavy singles and came back to do heavy singles, then yes, doing heavy singles right away, I would have got fucked up. You got to get reacclimated to it. But I personally think from a longevity standpoint, maintaining the ability to be able to strain for a heavy single from a longevity standpoint has helped me more than my ability to maintain muscle mass.
It's because that's mostly neurological activation. That has nothing to do with muscle tissue.
Yeah.
It's the ability to use the muscle tissue and turn on the fucking spark plug that you need to sustain. So I believe that you need to still strain as you get older, but that also means that you have to be thinking about your blood pressure and your health, because if you're 55 and you got 160 over 120 blood pressure, max effort squats are not for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But if you're healthy, I completely agree. So again, it's context. So we get a lot of these guys come in. I know these older firemen and people like, well, I just want to be big and strong. And I'm like, well, you're 55 and your health is terrible. I'm not maxing you.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You could take off that body fat and that inflammation and get that blood pressure straight, and then we can max. And then they leave. Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
But the point is, it's context. I think it's not the age, it's what age is that on your body. You could be 55 and as healthy as a 25-year-old, or you could be 55 and you're actually 75.
Yeah.
It's not chronological, right?
Yes.
It's kind of health age, not chronological age.
So you answer the follow-up because the follow-up question is, if they're not ready, what should they do to be able to get ready? And if they're at that age, you just nailed it right on the head.
Work capacity.
They have to build the work capacity, but they also need to get the blood pressure under control, because that's a huge risk factor if you're starting at that high number.
Not only that, you got cholesterol, triglycerides, you got all these other factors that could throw clots. You could have strokes, you could have aneurysms. We've seen that here recently from people doing things that are slightly unhealthy. I mean, that's been around for years, but the point is like, you have to earn the right to do maxes, no matter what your age group is. The younger generation needs to earn it by having their fucking technique right, and the older generation needs to earn it by staying fucking healthy.
That's a good point.
And if you don't have one of those two, then shut the fuck up about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you wouldn't have a problem. I'm 40, I'll be 45. You don't have a problem with me maxing here today, do you?
No.
Why?
Because you're in shape and you can, it's easy to understand. It's funny though, because.
But what if I'm sitting here and I'm 360?
No.
I can't see my dick.
No.
And now you could tell I got edema all over my fucking ankles, and now I want to come and max with you. You're going to be like, hey man, this is my business, and if you fucking die in here, I'm going to get sued. Right? I mean, how many times do we see that?
It's interesting though, because when you're young, you take your health for granted.
When you're young,
you can have high blood pressure and get away with it.
When you're young, it's not a health issue, it's a technical issue. And when you're old, it's a health issue and a technical issue.
Yeah.
Depending on your background. But you get my point. You have to earn it on both ends of the spectrum. The best thing I ever got, and I've talked to you about this before, but the best thing I ever gotten when I was a kid was Jim Dawson and Tim Smith. So Dawson deadlifted 722 in 1969-70 at 242. I don't think anybody pulled 800 yet. I mean, he was a fucking massive deadlifter back in Indianapolis. And then Tim Smith benched 500 at 181 at 20 years old. So like a Kenny Patterson, just didn't have the same work ethic after that point. They were my coaches when I was a kid at a local YMCA, and they wouldn't let me max for the first 4 years I trained. They said, no, your technique's going bad. You got to stop. Okay. And I listened. And then wouldn't you know it, I'm a teenage world record holder at 19. Because when I strain, my technique never falters. When have you ever seen me do something that gets shitty? Never. But why? Because the first 4 years was technique-based training. It had nothing to fucking do with what was on the bar. I remember the first time I benched 300, I was probably 15, and I did it easy. And I went up to Dawson and Timmy. I'm like, dude, I just benched 300 easy. I should have done like 325. He goes, don't worry about it. You'll do 350 the next time you bench, and it'll be easy again. And they were right. First 350 was like, probably had 380 in me, but they weren't going to let me touch it until they knew when I went to maximum strain, there was no technical breakdown. And they didn't do that because they were as smart as me. And they'll tell you that 100 miles an hour. They were afraid to hurt me. They were afraid. They didn't want to have to answer to my mom. And my mom did not really want me doing this shit. She's like, you're just going to get fucking hurt. She was a nurse practitioner, and Dawson and Timmy promised her I wouldn't get hurt. And so, like, your ego is not going to get in the way of me pissing off your mom.
Yeah.
When I'm little.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting though, because if somebody that's worked with teens, it's like you can do anything.
I think that was my biggest. I mean, and I mean, it's been so long ago, but you remember when I came into Westside as a teenager, I was a sponge. I didn't walk around like I was some king shit. I asked you tons of questions. I ate with Louie, asked him tons of questions. I was a fucking sponge. And if you told me to do something, I was just going to listen. And that was my biggest, other than being a great sleeper, that was my biggest advantage, was I was willing to listen to people that were better than me and not try to jump 50 stages above where I should have been at the time. And then by the time I'm 20, I'm doing 700 squats, 500 benches, 700 deadlifts. And then by the time I'm 23, I have all the American records in the USAPL drug tested for you assholes out there. They, everybody from Westside Barbell took a bunch of drugs. I didn't touch anything until I was 25.
Let's take a bathroom break real quick. I got to piss like a racehorse.
Yeah, go ahead, buddy. How you liking it? Good?
No, it's great. You guys are selecting Merrick for your telehealth platform needs. They have a couple different ways that they go about doing this. The first is through a self-selected experience. So there's a table talk panel, which is the full panel. That would be the panel that I personally get twice a year. That's checking everything. You name it, it's all there. The other panel is a checkup panel with a guided optimization. You're connected with a patient care coordinator, and the patient care coordinator will meet with you to determine what your needs are, thing to be able to help optimize your health or mitigate without judgment. So the discount code again is Table Talk Merrick Health for all your hormone optimization and performance needs. The Swiss Symposium 2023. Yes, we are bringing this back to Columbus again. The date is October 20 and 21. Columbus, Ohio. Hilton, it's the same location it was last year. If you head over to the website, there's a big banner that links directly to Swiss. There's also a link in the description box so you can see who the presenters are as we are booking them for the symposium. The symposium's been going on for 20 years. It's, in my opinion, probably a little biased, but in my opinion, one of the best symposiums when it comes to strength and conditioning, sport medicine, therapy, physical therapy. Right now, the admission is 38% off or 48% off. Don't know. I'm not looking. I'm just kind of looking at the camera right now, but it's the early bird rate. That rate is until July 1st. So now is the best time for you to sign up. When you go to register, there's 3 different ways that you can register for the symposium. There's the general admission, which gets you into all the different lectures that you want to go to. The caveat is there's 3 or 4 lectures going on at the same time. So the second option allows you to purchase the videos of all the lectures for you to be able to watch at a later time. So that allows you and gives you access to everybody that's presenting if there's 2 people presenting at the same time that you would really like to see. The format that those are in is, it's a streaming service. So it's if you've ever purchased a training course from anybody before, it's very similar to that. So you log in and then there's all the presentations that are there. You just click, you watch, you stream. It's how it works. The third option is the VIP option, and included in that is the Sunday after the symposium. A limited number of people will be coming out to our gym, the S5 compound at Elite FTS, with a handful, maybe a little bit more of the presenters that are there just to train, to hang out, have some barbecue, have a good time. And that again is limited on the attendance. It's already 50% sold out or 50% of the spots left, depending on how you want to look at it. Go to the link in the description. We'll have more information about the Swiss throughout the podcast as we move forward. We have a lot of the presenters booked for the podcast, so we'll be talking more about it. We'll see you there. Are we on or not on? Okay, so we're back. What I want to jump into is the reasons for conjugate. Let's just go straight there, right? So people can cite that, because that's usually where the conversation, actually that's not where the conversation begins. Where the conversation usually begins is that somebody's saying, here's why you should do conjugate, and they throw it out in some shithead way. Yeah. Right? Where, actually, no. In the world we're in now, what we see are, here's why you should not do conjugate. Yeah. So what are the reasons why you should?
Well, conjugate is just going to improve your longevity, period, end of story. That was the whole reason it was made for. And if you were to look at, if we were able to take 100 people do conjugate and 100 people don't, and they're highly skilled like they were in the old Soviet Union, you would see far better loading schemes as far as how much volume, intensity, and duration that the conjugate group would be able to do above and beyond what linear would be able to do, for multiple reasons. One, conjugate guys are going to feel better because they're not neurologically fried from doing the same shit all the time. And two, what you're going to see is the mileage is going to be less. And three, you're going to see that linear periodization only touches specific singles and doubles and triples only in Cajun, because it's not consistently in their system. That was the biggest thing I learned from Louis with conjugate is time. When you train conjugate, your time output matches more consistently your competitive lifts. If I'm doing 2s and 3s and singles all the time, I have more of those singles or 1 rep maxes in my training than I do if I'm doing 10s and 12s or even 5s, for example. So the specificity thing that people want to throw out, actually the time of the training is more specific than doing linear, even though you think that the mode of the exercise is specific. Yeah. Time has a lot to do with it too. Yes. And I don't hear any fucking body talking about that. And I remember Louis talking about it all the time. And I was like, that was like a huge like light bulb to why, in my opinion, when I was a kid, that I needed to use it. Yeah, I'm not squatting with a straight bar all the time, but I'm doing way more fucking singles than you are.
Yes. Time was one. Pressure is another one. Like how much pressure can you maintain in your body throughout that time?
Exactly. So if you need to be as strong as you possibly can for roughly, let's say 4 to 8 seconds, then you need to train in those areas fairly consistently, which conjugate in the right hands does wield. The next big thing is that I've never seen a system that doesn't ignore certain types of training for very long, or at least maintains it. So if I want to be dynamic effort strong, sub-maximal weights with maximal speed, intent, I'm doing that constantly. I'm doing maximum effort constantly, and I'm utilizing the repetition method in a better way in order for me to not overtrain one specific area. No matter how you like to train, you're either doing repetition method, max effort, or dynamics. There is nothing in between. It's a variation of those three. Which system have you ever seen that never ignores either three? Only conjugate. Yeah. So if you understand that there's 3 methods of training and you don't ignore any of those 3 methods, conjugate fits the bill on that. The next thing is, if the training is dialed in correctly, your workout shouldn't last more than an hour. And that is heavily documented in the book as well, and talks a lot about how after about 50 minutes or so, give or take some, 50 minutes or so, your hormone levels start to fall out. So now all the shit you're doing is not really creating any more gains. So that means the only way to do more work is to increase density of the training. So you notice in my warm-ups, I do 300 reps in 12 to 14 minutes. We'll get to that later, but that is a reason that we utilize that. That's the repetition method under sub-maximal weights. And we utilize it for GPP, conditioning, right? And ligament and tendon density.
Now, is your warm-up counted in the training time?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's counted in the training time. Now, for my max effort lift, if I'm going to do 5 to 7 sets and each set gets 3 to 4 minutes rest, we're at about 20, 25 minutes. So that's 15 plus 25. What's that? 40. Now I have 20 minutes for accessories. It forces me to stay in those ranges so I don't overdo anything, but I also maximize my time. And that's more me than conjugate.
Yeah.
But I started seeing all this 50 minutes, and from not even just the Soviets, all over everywhere. In all kinds of endocrinology studies. And I'm like, oh shit, like I was on the right track, because I felt like shit after an hour and 10 minutes anyway. And initially I thought I was lazy, but I started to realize that if I was working out longer than that, my density wasn't strong enough to increase my GPP, meaning I was resting 6 or 10 minutes between a squat rep. I wasn't maintaining that time. I was fucking off in between my accessories and not maintaining time. So what I find is that skeleton of the conjugate system in my mind forces me to stay in the right time parameter in training, and also not focus on too many abilities in one session, which conjugate does well as well, right? Like I'm going to focus on, if I only got 50 minutes, I can focus on mastering or getting strong in one core lift, and I can probably focus on a few things for my warm up and a couple of accessories. But guess what? That's all I can fucking recover from anyway. So it forces me to stay in line with what I feel is optimal over the long term.
Yeah.
So I guess that would be some of the major things that come to mind of why you would do that. The downside to it is you have to be smart, and you have to know what to pick, and you can't do the things you like. Sometimes you have to do the things you fucking suck at, and the things that are hard, and the things you don't want to do. And that sometimes is not fun for people, and therefore they look at training as always being fun. Well, if your goal is PRs, then fun needs to go over here, and what you need to do goes over here. And that's what I find a lot of people have major issues with, is they get to this system of way they like to do things, and then that is their limiting factor, and they will not change. The biggest compliment I ever got was about 5 or 6 years ago. I was doing seminars with Paul Quinn and Eddie over in Prague and Amsterdam in the UK. And we were over there doing seminars, and at the end of the seminar, they were asking them, what were some things you would change? And I answered last. I remember this like it was yesterday. And Paul Quinn and Eddie told 30 fucking strangers overseas that if they had to do over again, they'd have trained like me. I mean, think about that. You have a guy that is arguably the greatest powerlifter in the world, realizes that what I'm saying he should have followed. And Paul Quinn, one of the most read guys that I've ever seen, could read like 3 or 4 different languages, and he's saying the same fucking thing. And I'm like, I was on to something. And I was still competing then, so that was like a big morale booster for me right before I broke those other raw squat records. Because I mostly did that because I wanted, not just for myself, but for us. As when I mean us, I mean the old West Side crews, and I consider you guys the OGs, and we were after that, but I still consider myself somewhat part of that hybrid. I wanted what we worked so hard for, to understanding this shit, to get people to understand that you could do this raw. Because I saw the writing on the wall, and I saw that powerlifting people were going, West Side shit only works if you got squat suits on and you only got bench shirts on. Well, what about me, asshole?
Yeah.
Because I trained in gear for my whole prime. And then the last 3 years or 4 years that I had the youthful ability left, I went and broke world records raw. What do you got to say now?
Well, they always have something to say.
Well, you get what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And now I'm showing Marley how to do this even faster, and she's doing a 400-pound deadlift at 13 years old.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, guys, it's just the fact of the matter is we were all willing to learn. We were willing to move away from our comfort zones. We were willing to study people that were better than us, instead of just going, West Side and Dave Tate and all them fucking suck. I'm going to stay over here in Indiana and do my thing because I'm a badass. I wasn't like that. I was willing to come in and absorb, take what I could from you guys, make it the best I can make it, and then come up with all this shit where it really, I don't think I could have ever made it to this level.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I guess that's all thrown into one, but that's why conjugate works so well, is it kept me. I'll give you a personal scenario. I benched 500 as a teenager. You saw me at that time. I did 5 plates in West Side. I think the first day I was there. Yeah. You and George were there, and George comes up and says, your fucking triceps are garbage. That was my good job for the day, thumbs up. And long story short, at that time I was training linear because I didn't know any better. I mean, I saw Louis' articles a little bit, and I was trying to implement what I could, but I was a fucking idiot. I was a kid. But I was already having shoulder issues. My back was already bothering me. My knees didn't feel too hot. And as soon as I switched to conjugate, mind you, it took about a year to understand what I needed So I didn't see any immediate gains. In about 12 to 14 months, my lifts went up another 15% for no other reason other than I switched systems. Remember, not next week, a year and a half later, roughly, because I learned myself and I started going, oh, this is how you do things. That's why it gets so frustrating, because you try to keep people from going into pitfalls and helping them, and they can only help what they want to absorb. And that's when it gets fucking complicated, because I felt like I wanted to absorb a lot. And I feel like today there's just so much noise that there's no way for people to absorb anything, and they end up getting frustrated, quitting, or getting injured.
Well, I think there's another factor where there's what is, so what you presented, I would say, is optimal, where there's a lot of people that won't want to do this in that hour.
Yeah.
Right. It's more fun, or they enjoy it more over 2 hours. And, you know, as somebody that may fall on that side, there's a trade-off you make. Like, so the trade-off's okay, but understand you're not going to make the same gains that you would make if it was done otherwise. So why are you there? You know, are you there just specifically to be able to get stronger, or are you there for the experience of being in the gym and being all that?
At the time, I thought that gains were my most important factor, even beyond the education. I still wanted to find the best way to do it. And I didn't care about the time, because, again, remember Eddie telling me it was going to take me 6 years to put 100 more pounds on my squat. So I was already ready for that. Now it was like, how do I get there? And then when I met you and I started talking to Buddy and all these other guys, I'm like, I'm not going to be able to be a good coach if I'm walking around in a knee brace and I got rods in my fucking back and I train like a dipshit. Who wants to listen to that? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm walking around. I've had no surgeries. I've only pulled a groin. I mean, bad enough it bled down to my calf, but you know, like, I've had little bumps and bruises, but I've never been fucking hurt.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that's not a testament to other people. Like, I've seen guys stronger than me, but they all pay for it. You know, so I feel that I pushed my genetic limits as far as I could fucking go, and I didn't pay for it. And to me, that would be the real reason why you would want to use it. So you can get super strong, but not get fucked up, because guess what? You could have the best numbers in the world, and Larry Wheels is retired now. And I'm going to tell you this, in 5 or 8 years, nobody's going to give a fuck who he was. Maybe even less. I mean, how many times did we go see Chuck? He squats close to 1,200 for years. He's the best squatter in the world. Everybody knows it. He retires for 1 or 2 years, gets 2 rods in his back, comes back and squats 1,003. And people are coming to me and asking me who that is.
Oh, I know. I mean, this is the nature of the sport.
But my point is, why use a system that destroys you to fucking pieces? Again, I would think that my mentality may be different and trying to get gains faster or at all costs. If you were getting paid like an NFL running back, you're getting a fucking trophy. Or you're just getting bragging rights in the gym and you want to use the dumb way.
Yeah.
That's full-blown retarded.
Yeah.
So that's my whole spiel on the whole thing. And like I said, I want anybody to train any way that they think that they're going to make progress, but I want you to sit down and really think, is the way I'm doing it the best way? My way is not the best way. I think it's on the right track. Nobody lives long enough and nobody's in their prime long enough to know exactly how to do it 100% perfect for everybody. But we can learn from people that have had longevity, minimal injuries, and insane strength levels.
Oh, yeah.
You can't learn from genetic freaks.
Yeah, what I'm saying is, what I'm trying to get them to understand is, if you want, because there's a lot of people that want to power build or whatever it's going to be. You can do that, right? If you enjoy doing that, but you got to understand, here's the negative part of that.
Yeah.
You're not going to get as strong.
No.
And you're probably not going to get as big.
No.
But if that's what you enjoy doing, that's what you like to, and you understand the shortcut. That's the key part here.
I think that the hardest part with power building, and I'm just not going to throw this under the table, but I want to bring it up.
Yeah.
Is that people that tend to focus a little bit more on aesthetics tend to have more of the problems. You ever notice that? Like, all these people we're talking about dying within the last 2 to 3 years, they're not strength athletes. They're fucking aesthetic athletes. They're the guys that worry about how good their six-pack looks in a fucking video shoot. Or, like, to me, the strength training, the aesthetics along with the diuretics and a lot of the other drugs that people will take in exorbitant amounts to look a certain way, are far more dangerous in a mindset than just trying to be stronger.
That's an interesting conversation, because I had that with somebody on the podcast a while ago, and I extended the conversation past retirement. So say the bodybuilder and powerlifter both are serious, both compete at the highest level, and they both retire at 40.
Sure.
Which one dies sooner after 40? The bodybuilder or the powerlifter?
Yeah.
And based upon looking past that time, one of them is probably going to diet down, lose weight, and be healthier lifestyle. One of them is probably going to start fishing, drinking beer, never work out again, and end up dying of a heart attack at a younger age. Right? So
the mileage incurred from achieving those extreme amounts.
Yeah.
I would say that a professional powerlifter that's pushed the genetic limits to the brink of insanity is going to have a better roll of the dice than somebody who was an IFBB pro. We both know that from personal experience.
Organ-wise, yes. Joint-wise, maybe not.
Yeah, joint-wise might be genetic and training
tough
mixture. But my point being is, like, I find that a lot of people that are chasing aesthetics are willing to do far more stupid shit on a grand scale than guys that are chasing strength, because eventually you realize that no amount of drugs, no amount of this is there's just a point where you just have to be smarter. Your technique has to get better. In bodybuilding, nobody cares what Ronnie Coleman's squat technique looks like.
You know, the other thing I think though is most people that I know that have used anabolics that are powerlifters for a long period of time push the limit at some point.
We all did,
and realized it was worse. Like the low back pumps fucked their training up. They weren't able to recover. They couldn't breathe. And it's like they had to back it down because it hurt their performance. Where I don't know the bodybuilding side that well to know, but at a certain point, it was like, this makes no sense.
I think that you can mask taking extreme amounts of drugs, training like a bodybuilder far more than you can a powerlifter because of those reasons. You know, I've talked to you about the anabolics that we use both at Westside and on my own, and Serrano was always a big integral part of making sure that I wasn't doing anything too fucking stupid, which I think is something very important. I know you sponsor Merrick.
Yeah.
You guys need to be on that, because I think that's what saved my ass. Because if I would have took all the information that Louis was just handing me, it would have been not a great scenario. And I was not smarter than that, but I had enough common sense to realize that the unhealthy approach was probably not the greatest idea. The point being is that I think that people that are chasing the aesthetics can mask taking way more shit. Because as you're saying, as a powerlifter, once the amount of drugs in your system becomes so toxic to the point you can't perform the lifts anymore, then you're gonna back those down. Whereas a bodybuilder doesn't give a fuck, because you'll just change the exercise.
Yeah. Well, recovery's so fucking, as we talked about, you know, recovery's so important. Maybe we need to revisit that in strength sports, because in bodybuilding, it's easy to pivot. You know, it's hypertrophy training. You just lower the volume. You just go to easier exercises.
And if one muscle group suffers from another overtraining, it's not necessarily detrimental to a performance of a lift.
Not when you only have 12 weeks
so
left.
If me and you go blast biceps right now, and then tomorrow we got to work lats, who gives a fuck?
Yeah.
But if I got a bench heavy, I care a lot.
And you got to recover. You know, the recovery is fucking huge.
Yeah.
And
Which I can't believe why people want to argue with 72-hour rule. And that's another thing you see a bunch of in the foreign literature, is that you can't train the exact same muscle group more than 72 hours. They tried it. They did it a bunch, and they figured out that it just wasn't conducive to anything.
Well, let's go into that just reminded me of something. Let's go into recovery workouts, like, because there's what I would call them, because this, you'll see where I'm going, because this is, I'm seeing this start to become popular.
Okay.
Like a new thing.
Like
right?
mini workouts?
Yeah, like mini workout. Well, recovery workouts are feeder workouts,
Okay.
right? So I used to do things that were recovery workouts when I was sore, to be able to work the soreness out, sled work, eccentric or concentric only.
Yeah.
And then sometimes there'd be feeder workouts for the tricep to be able to help push a bench. This is a new concept now, by the way. Just saw it last week.
Really?
Yeah, just fucking
Haven't
came
we
by.
been doing that for the last 30 years?
But it's
Okay.
where I see the confusion coming is they're going to start doing this shit again is pre-programmed and not doing it as a response. Like if I had to do a recovery workout in my brain, it was, I fucked up. I shouldn't have to be doing this.
Your training should be optimal enough that you don't need a recovery workout.
This is my way to get back on track so it doesn't keep going through a bad stimulus.
Well, I think that what you're trying to get at is, first of all, I want to talk to the beginners and intermediates. I personally didn't use mini workouts until I had been top 5 in the world. So there's step one.
Yeah.
I remember Louis teaching me that in 04-05 when I moved over here full time. Before then, I wasn't using mini workouts. Why? Because I couldn't recover from them. I was so tuned into those major workouts that everything else was about restoration, but mostly passively, meaning that I didn't need muscle. I didn't want more muscle contraction. I needed a thing to cool off. That could have been genetic, whatever. I started using mini workouts about 2006-ish, in that range. Did see some benefit, but only at below whatever 4 RPE was at that day, which again goes into some of that shit in the book. But 4 RPE is the limiting factor to your restoration workouts because it's enough stimulus for the muscle and central nervous system to actually gain some property, but not enough to cause an alarm or stress. 4 RPE.
Yeah.
Now, here's where it gets complex with the beginner and the intermediate. Motherfuckers at that stage do not know what 4 RPE is. There's 4 RPE, what's that? I guarantee you somebody's on the thing. Rate of perceived exertion is something you earn to learn how to utilize, and the Soviets went to once you became master of sport. The reason that happened was because once you become advanced, your strength is varied by up to 10% per day. That means if you're basing everything off of, say, a 600-pound bench, because that's what you got 6 months ago was your best, what if you only bench 560 right now? You're basing everything off of a 40 pounds heavier? So you base it off of how you feel, which makes you more in tune to your body, but also you have to be respectful of what that feedback is, and that takes practice only at the advanced stage. So again, if you're not at the advanced stage, listen to this, you don't need fucking mini workouts is my point.
Yeah.
Because you won't know how to regulate the amount.
And it'll make the situation worse and you won't be able to recover.
You won't recover. You'll go backwards. You possibly create an injury or change your training structure because a certain muscle group's got too much stimulus and now it doesn't want to activate with the compound movement.
That's a good point.
Right.
No, that's with like the band push downs, 300 a day every single day. Right. So there's a time and a place for everything. So I'll put that out there. But if you do that and it fucks up the way that your motor units are activating throughout the prime mover when you're doing it, you're kind of educating yourself how to do it.
Yeah, you're basically just frying the spark plug and now the piston doesn't want to ignite when it's time to actually do the real work. And is why the 72-hour rule needs to be talked about more often and it needs to be instituted for everybody. There's no fucking shortcuts past that. There's a reason that the Soviets and multiple authors in the Soviet bloc talk about that particular time and why you need it. Right. And that's just where it just gets so complex to try to teach people how to train smart because they think that there's some kind of level of shortcut and there's just really not. Mini workouts really never need to be used until you're at an advanced stage. It's probably going to cause more harm than good if doing so.
And I would put, because this was a conversation I had with Sif years ago when I was still competing, was even recovery modalities need to be used as, oh, fuck, I fucked up. Now I need this to stay on track, but you should still learn, how did I get here? Right? Some people want to throw that shit in there.
Well, yeah. And not only that, modalities are the same as training. Once the body recognizes the stimulus, it's no longer effective. So for you jackasses on here that are hopping in a cold plunge 3 days a week because you think it's helping anything, it only helped for the first week or two, and now your body's used to it and doesn't give a shit anymore.
Yes.
So you have to rotate your modalities. Oh, fuck, there's conjugate system again.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll use my hot tub. Other times I'll use an ice bath. Other times I'll just do hot, cold contrast. Sometimes I'll go get massage. And I don't do them in any strategical order so my body doesn't recognize them.
Yeah. That's one thing.
Doesn't that sound like training a little bit?
It's crazy. I mean, it's one thing Mel helped me with because I kind of figured out which ones work better than others. I didn't use the ones that worked the best until before meet. They were gold. It's
Did you watch my cold tub video on YouTube?
No.
So watch it, and I talk about how I only use it before Circumax.
Yeah. Okay.
And I used it at only 2 to 4 weeks a year pre-contest training, getting ready for a competition because it helped with joint inflammation, which is, I'm going to tell you, it's all it's fucking good for because I've done it for like 30 years now. It makes your knees and your back feel better after a heavy training cycle. Everybody's talking, well, it depletes muscle, blah, 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 and proteins. I'm like, if that's the case, why do I still have 20-inch arms? I should be fucking look like I have AIDS right now, right? Yeah. Point being is you only use that kind of stuff when it's absolutely needed or you're taking away its potency.
Yeah.
Right? Same thing with training. If you have, say, a 5-chain, 3-rep box squat max with a safety bar, and you know that makes you strong as shit, don't use it all the time.
Exactly.
Use it sparingly, just like you would the modalities of a recovery method.
Strategically. That should be what the whole off season is for.
All we've been talking about is how to strategically plan
Yes.
as much as you can everything in your life, your sleep, your training, your recovery, dude, like, again, it's all back down to a plan,
Yes.
right? But most people are not planning. They're especially not long-term planning.
Yes.
And they're setting up for failure.
Or paying attention would probably be a better way to look at it too. So they're not planning, but they're also not paying attention to, did this drive this?
Mm-hmm.
And because some exercises do drive other ones better for certain people.
Yeah.
And it drives me crazy because they want us to tell them. And like, we can give you ideas.
But it's not going to work the same.
Exactly.
So my double orange bench for a 1-rep max with a pause, if it was above, when I did 611, I hit 465. So a double orange 465, that's like 665.
Yeah.
Boom. If I could hit that, I knew I was going to hit a PR on the bench. If I hit at 470, 460, if I was around 440, 425, I did not try a PR on the bench. It wasn't there. It was a testing exercise. That comes into a whole nother play that really cannot be coached until somebody's around you for a very long time,
Yes.
which is you have training exercises, competitive exercises, and then what I call testing exercises. Mm-hmm. The testing exercises for most people are going to be the competitive lift, a 1-rep max squat, deadlift, bench. It's what I use in most of my assessments because for them, they're going to make the mistakes in that particular scenario. At our level, when we were at the best, I had 6 or 7 of those exercises that I knew where I was at all times because of where I strategically placed them throughout the year were giving me feedback.
How do you explain those 3 to when you're in a seminar or just putting it out there? Because I know exactly what you mean. I have a very hard time trying to explain it to other people.
I try to avoid it at all costs.
It's because it's hard. It's hard
because the problem is it becomes, I can tell you what worked for me and I can show you, but then if you have different structural weaknesses or different,
well, they want to know what a tester is, what a builder is.
A tester would be an exercise that I use from about 3 different camera angles, and I'm looking for technical deficiencies or where I fail. So for instance, if I'm going to do a 5-chain football bar max and I fucking get right here and I can't lock it, I know that my triceps aren't engaging, mostly because I can't turn my hand.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to work on that spot. That's going to dictate what I'm going to do for my triceps the next 2 to 3 weeks on my accessories. So the tester is telling me where my accessories and what angles I'm weak in those accessories, mm-hmm. and what I need to focus on. The building exercises are ones I throw in just to try. So I saw Dave Tate do a reverse band camber bar squat, ultra narrow to a fucking 10-inch box. Now, obviously, I'm not going to break a PR on that. Mm-hmm. That's crazy setup, but it's going to hit me in a completely different way. That's just a builder exercise. So now it's an exercise that's going to put me out of my technical proficiency. It's probably going to make me weaker, but it's making me stronger in a way that the compound movement in and of itself is not going to accomplish. Mm-hmm. It's going to be something just way fucking off, like doing a Paul Anderson squat or a good morning squat. That's not going to put you in the best position to squat the maximal weights, but it's going to make your lower back stronger than shit, which in 6 weeks, if you're taking a competition exercise, that extra lower back strength, if it's a weakness, is going to show that you've worked on that and now it's not a sticking point anymore, or it's not a failure point.
Yeah.
So you have a competitive movement, which is, I'm going to put a gun to your head. I don't care what happens obviously you want perfect technique.
Yeah.
You're trying to do that at all costs. A builder exercise, you're picking movements that you know are not your strength to build up weaknesses in planes or positions that maybe you don't get attacked in normal training. And a testing exercise is letting you get an idea of where you're at with that competition exercise without actually having to do it. So if I do a double orange band with 465, I know I bench 600.
And where to focus the weak points.
Right.
Or where to focus the movements to build the weak points.
Yep. So again, I'll throw you out some really good gold mines is in the off season, I do a compound movement of some sort, a competition movement of some sort at some rep range in my exact position about every 6 to 7 weeks. Might be a 5-rep max, but it's exactly how I squat. Then in between that is all builder exercises because I don't give a shit when I'm testing. I don't care. I'm just trying to just stay strong in the off season, fix weaknesses. Then when I get into competition mode, which is about 18 weeks out roughly, I will switch to doing a competition specific exercise every 3 weeks. It might be different, but it may not be a single, but it's the exact same way that I squat. Now I'm following the accommodation law, and I'm flipping the coin. I'm following the specificity law.
So as you've gotten older, you're not competing anymore. So do you just pick a movement and call that your competition movement? Like I'll use a fucking...
I don't use competition movements anymore.
But do you pick a movement to train it as that?
I just do, what I do is I go in and I select a movement that, I'll move around a little bit with my warm up. Usually what people don't realize and what the real power is of me posting my actual workouts on Patreon is I'm warming up and I'm seeing what is still depleted from the week before. And then I got a big library of exercises. I select the exercise I feel that I'm most potent for that day.
What do you mean by depleted?
So like, let's say I did a really heavy deadlift the week before and my back's still kind of pissy because I'm 45. Mm-hmm. Well, now I'm going to fucking belt squat next week because I know that deadlift the week before has still got me in a depleted state where I'm not at my strongest. So I'm not going to select another exercise that's going to beat that same area to pieces. Mm-hmm. So I rotate it based on how I feel in the warm up. And then sometimes I warm up, I feel better and I'm like, okay, that exercise is tolerable. So as you get older, it's not what you can do, it's what you can tolerate and recover from. When you're younger, it's what you can recover from. Yeah. When you're older, it's what you can tolerate.
When you were going through writing the book, because there's a couple that we've talked about as you've come out, getting different resources that surprised you or some other things that you may not have known the origins were.
Already got it.
Yeah.
Okay. The first big one was the law of 72 to 75%. I was following it to a T and didn't even know it. That law means that, and I base it off RPE now, but let's just say I based off percentages. My warm-ups are roughly 40% in intensity, hardness, because it's 25 reps. Mm-hmm. My main lift is usually a 9, whether it's as fast as I can move or as strong as I can move that day. And my accessories are around an 8.5. Because I'm doing 10 or 12 reps. So there's no way it's a fucking 10. A 10 would be 1. Yeah. Add all that up and divide it by 3. And what you're going to find is it's 73%. 73.73 RPE. Or if you base it on percentages, 73%. It fluctuates 72, 74, but it's right in that range. I'm like, holy shit. I was dead nuts with that. And it was what I could tolerate. Mm-hmm. So I just thought, okay, that's all I can handle. That's what I'm going to do. And then I start digging in that. I'm like, oh my God, I was dead nuts on that. That was one massive light bulb. The next massive light bulb, because Alexiev, what I was consider the godfather of understanding with Medvedev static next to his side, conjugate training, was that he would warm up with a 50-pound kettlebell for 15 minutes before he touched any compound movements. Every training cycle. And I'm like, wait a minute, that dude was insanely fit. So that was the first aha moment of how long that warm-up needed to be. Okay, if Alexiev's doing shit for 15 minutes, it's just general fitness, I'm going to step that up a notch and I'm going to focus on weaknesses in that time. Maybe one primer, which is a movement that maybe mimics what I'm going to do. So if I'm going to deadlift, let's say I just take a trap bar and put 65 pounds on the bar and do 4 sets of 25 trap bar deadlift. Now, when I go to the deadlift, I'm warm to that pull. If it's a squat, maybe it's a belt squat, a goblet squat. I try to stay away from shit that's too compressive, but it's the movement. Mm-hmm. And then I select 2 isolated weak points that I feel are those particular problems. So I felt like what Alexiev was doing had the time right. And then what I did was time in the weaknesses to potentiate those movements and make sure that those muscle groups were going to help me with my main lift once my conditioning level was primed to that point that it didn't matter.
So what if it's not primed to the point where...
You need to make sure that that warm-up is extremely light, almost nothingness. Get used to the volume. Just very simply. Maybe take 2, 3, 4 minutes rest before you start compound movements. But if anybody were to come to train with me on Sunday, they would see I'd go through 4 sets of 25 with 3 exercises. I used the bamboo bar. I used Seitzer's bar. So I did that with 50-pound kettlebells and a 10 on each side for 4 sets of 25. Then I did face pulls with the rope. And then I did sled drags because it's hot and shit out. Yeah. Sled drags, rows, absolutely opposite of the bench. I rested 35 seconds and started my first speed set. I did 8 sets of speed bench. Mm-hmm. See what I'm saying? Yeah. But I wouldn't start somebody like that because they don't have my conditioning level in that particular realm. So point being is you just start off with insanely light. Everybody that ever asked me about the winning warm-ups, And I ask them, well, what dumbbells are you using, right? Say on the bench press for warm up. Well, I'm using 40s. How much do you bench? 250? You fucking dipshit. I'm using 50s, and I could probably still bench 550 if you have a gun to my head.
Yeah.
They just don't get it. It's supposed to be not hard. Just because it looks impressive to you that I'm doing that, you have to remember that my strength level is way higher than yours. So based in percentages, I'm way lighter than you.
Yeah.
RPE 4. Right? Sometimes it even goes down to 3 if I don't feel really good that day. You know what I mean?
But for anybody that's just starting, it's just doing.
Yeah, because what are you trying to do? You're priming the nervous system to function correctly and turn on muscle groups that may not be at optimal at a compound movement. That's all you're fucking doing. Now, as you get better, you can utilize it for ligament, tendon density, hypertrophy. You can go heavier. So in off seasons, I'll up the RPE, make the warm up harder because I don't care about the main lift.
Now, were there any things as you were going through there that you've changed your mind on?
It was interesting. I changed my mind on my thought processes on lifting twice a day. So as I dug more and more into the research, I started to realize by the late 70s, early mid 80s, they were lifting 2 times a day. But what they were doing that and getting away with it because of all the other variables they were controlling. And they stated that in, I can't remember which book, but they're saying we could only utilize the 1 time a day training if we couldn't keep control of their extracurricular activity. If we had them locked down, we could train them twice a day. Here's what was interesting though. The twice a day guys only did 10% more work. They just split it into 2 sessions so they recovered better. So you would take the workout that you and I did, would do,
cut it in half.
And then we would do the warm up and the main lift, and then we'd go fucking eat, go take a nap, and then we'd come back and do the accessories. Maybe add another exercise on the accessories. That's it.
Yeah.
It wasn't like grandiose, crazy training sessions 2 times a day. It split it into pieces to recover better, and they used 6-hour split points in order for maximal hormonal and psychological restoration. But unless you're independently wealthy and you don't have to work and you can just go home and sleep and your kids aren't nagging you and you got all the food you need at home and you don't have to worry about having a job, or how the fuck are you going to do that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's why pro bodybuilders most of them are independently wealthy because they don't have a real job. I mean, when Ronnie got good, he had to quit everything.
Yeah.
Why? Because he didn't do shit like that, right?
One thing I've noticed over the past couple of years is you've traveled more. You're speaking in front of different audiences, different demographics that are outside of just straight strength and conditioning coaches.
Yeah, thank God.
And so, but what I'm wondering with that is, where's the disconnect, right? Because it's a completely different audience.
Oh,
so now you're talking, everything's got to come down to a different level.
Oh yeah.
But you can see bigger disconnects. One being there's to me not enough emphasis put on just strength in general.
Sure.
And that's huge, across personal training and all those other things.
Sure.
What are some of those disconnects that you've seen?
Well, the disconnect is obviously the strength. I mean, the strength level is just so much lower actually in some cases and instances. Going and talking to other places about how to train smarter is so much easier because they're not even close to their potential peak, versus guys like me and you, we're fighting for that extra 10. Hell, I can show somebody a trick and bump their bench up 50 fucking pounds.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah.
So I look like a fucking mad sorcerer, kind of like Louis used to do. So for me, speaking to another crowd that doesn't have this background sometimes is a better thing because they don't have all those old stipulations and thought processes to break down. They're fresh minds and they see me as the expert in this area. They're not like, well, what about this or what about that? They don't know anything about that. So I can mold them a better thought process before any of that stupid shit kicks in. So what I have found is that when I go speak to people that don't come from our environment, I actually have more power. As far as not just power, I have more influence.
Yeah.
I'm able to influence them in a better way because I don't have to worry about, well, yeah, but what about Larry Wheels with his linear periodization, or what about this, or what about that? I'm telling you to do it this way because I've seen it work 100 times, and I'm not going to argue with thousands of researchers, most of whom were way fucking smarter than anybody's training athletes today. End of story. And once you show them the references and the results and what you've done, and you're walking around squatted 1,200 pounds and you don't have any knee or back or hip issues, it's kind of a really good fucking business card.
Yeah.
Versus when you go to a powerlifting place and you're arguing, well, Matt, I'd like to use your stuff, but I fucked my elbow up doing it this way, or I fucked my shoulder up doing it that way. And I'm like, so now you want me to fix you after you've already fucked yourself up instead of being a fresh piece of clay.
Yeah.
That's why I took Marley on, because she's 13. She doesn't have a big background. I can just fix little things right now. They're never a problem. And she's a yes sir, no sir type person. And it's odd to see at 13 years old. But my point being is, like, I can make her a fucking superstar.
Yeah.
As long as I can keep her off the internet. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah.
So you get my point, though.
Yeah, yeah.
So sometimes speaking to other places is an advantage, not a disadvantage. The disadvantage, like what I think you're trying to get at, is you have to be very careful with going too deep into what you're trying to say, because you can get lost in it real fast. You know, talking about methods and percentages and things like that, or just, you got to read the room. I mean, if, you know, we had Bill Gates sitting right here, the conversation is going to be much different about me and you talking training.
Yeah.
We're going to make it generalized and basic. And the thing that's really helped me a ton, honestly, is training all the damn firemen I train and all the military. They don't have a fucking background in this shit. And guess what? I'm sorry to say, half of them don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
So they just want whatever they can feel better or be a little bit stronger or retire with a little bit less aches and pains. And I don't need to go to that level of education to talk to them. And that was some of the best things that ever happened to me is the last 20 years working with Dublin and Grove City and Violet and Whitehall fire departments, is teaching people that do not have this background and, most importantly, don't care. And I just have to figure out a way to get them to buy in a little bit so they can get some of this utilization of information in their life. That's really what's helped me. So I don't see a downside, because I train people that don't have this education all the fucking time. That was, I think, one of the biggest problems, and I'm not busting balls, but one of the biggest problems with like Kramer and Zatsiorski and a lot of these other guys is they lived in their own little cubicles. They weren't out in the area doing the fucking grind like I am all the time to understand when enough's enough with the education and learning how to get to people that don't really want this background. Mm-hmm. They just want something from it, something maybe even small, right? So a lot of it's just keeping them away from injuries or teaching them how to pick up people that are overweight and not hurt themselves. They don't care about their deadlift. So imagine having that, all these things that I've put together in my career, it gives me a lot of confidence to talk to anyone, because I don't care what your background is, I can teach you something.
Yeah.
Because I do that all fucking day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, it gets annoying sometimes.
Yeah.
But you get my point.
Well, sometimes it's different populations in the same day.
Yeah.
You know, which
so
is
imagine
weird.
like every day you have a group of guys that come out that train their ass off, which you do. And then every day you got a group of people that come in because they have to, and they don't want to be here, and they don't like lifting weights. And now you got to figure out that middle ground. That's what I do all fucking week. So it makes me,
Yeah.
I mean, it almost broke me psychologically, because you know where we came from.
Yeah.
But now I feel like, as you see, my attitude's changed a lot in the last 5-8 years, just doing what I'm doing, because I realize that there's only parts of that I can utilize with anybody. So I don't see the discord, because as soon as I see people start backing away because my information's too much, I just make the topic a little bit more palatable. Mm-hmm. And try not to go so crazy into whatever. But, you know, I feel like people on your podcast, when they want to talk to me about this stuff, this is what they want to know.
They want the heavier, they want the heavier stuff.
Exactly.
You know, it's interesting because, you know, I've been on some other podcasts and it's the same thing, you know, because the question, you can tell from the questions that you're being asked too. And it's like, oh, yeah.
Like they want to know the intensity of Westside Barbell, but they don't want to know the reps and set schemes, or they want to know the stories. Like what you're saying,
highlights, right? They don't want to know
the details,
the day-to-day boring shit,
the monotonous shit that actually makes you good. They want to know like these little blips of like, you know,
highlights and shit like that. But that's the internet, you know. That's just kind of how it is to begin with. Were there any other things that you had down there that you wanted to talk about?
No, I mean, I covered everything. I mean, the warm-ups covered. I think that gives people an inclination of why you should be doing those. Again, it's not to make you stronger, it's to help your technique and keep you from getting injured. And to me, it's worth its weight in gold. And we're going to get ready, hopefully, to do some studies with the University of Kansas with Dr. Fry. They've been using it for 5 years at Kansas with amazing results in the track team. And that's the highest level you can possibly imagine with all track, football, all those guys. I mean, if I can get those guys to see some major results, which they're seeing, we could put it down in some real data. Hard to refute that when you're dealing with the highest level athletes at D1 level that are Kansas. You know, that's not like where I came from, like Ball State or something, you know what I mean? Which was a great school for what I did, but point is it's not the cream of the crop athlete.
Yeah.
So, that and
when's the book? When do you think? I know it's hard to gauge, but when do you think it will come out?
I mean, they're not having to really do that much editing, which is really good. I mean, I was very fortunate to Roger, the guy that helps run Human Kinetics, was like, this is one of the most extensive books we've ever seen on training. It's amazing. So I'm only getting small little things, and they got to bring a media team out to shoot all the pictures that we want to use. You know that.
Yeah.
So they got to send them. Other than that, they expect it to be done somewhere around early 2024, and then I already have the certification ready for the actual book. So every question has a reference or references to it. I feel it's one of the most, not only just conjugate training, but as far as training to know that you know your shit with periodization, I feel it's one of the most highest levels that you could possibly imagine. And then what we'll do is people will stay members on the website, and I'll post educational videos every 30 days with non-punitive tests to keep people active on the website in order for them to keep learning and force them to watch what I want them to watch and learn what I want them to learn. So then that way it's interactive while they're staying on that certification. I think the biggest problem and I'm not busting their balls, they do a great job for the size that they are, but the NSCA, they do these CEUs, but we both know you go to the NSCA conferences, what the fuck are you going to learn?
Yes.
It's basically a political tool that they go to, and they can mingle with other people for jobs and shit. But I haven't been to too many NSCA conferences. I learned a whole lot.
I quit going so long ago.
Okay.
Just because.
Yeah, you
of
don't
that.
have to say that, but I will.
I did.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a time I had my CSCS, then I let it go, then I got it back, then it's just like, fuck it, I just let it go. It was just it.
And I think it's a great test, and I think it's a great.
No, I do
knowledge.
think it's a great test,
but I think their continuing education needs to be a little bit more stringent.
Yeah.
And I think holding on to that, I want to make mine. You hold on to it because you have to keep learning.
Well, I think with conjugate as well, it's important to keep learning.
Yeah, because you're going to, even if you understand all of the methods and the skeleton of the system, you are still going to be applying it to a different population and a different person constantly.
Yes.
Meaning that your education level has to stay up to date. There's a lot of new information in this too, and references that are ironically from 50 years ago are matching the same shit they're finding in 2022 and some of 2023 of the articles that I have found.
Well, isn't that interesting?
Wow. So everything's coming in full circle again, like we've been trying to tell people, but we've talked about it before, but I hope that this at least is a tool to help training come back out of the dark ages, because I feel, and I'm not busting its balls, but the advent of a lot of these super freaks coming out and training very basic to get super strong, CrossFit, and a handful of other variables have forced really training 25 years behind where it was when I came to see you in 2000, when Louis was putting out his best articles, when Paul Kuhn was still writing for all these big things. You had Mike Boyle in his prime. These guys, you had Verkhoshansky still alive. You had Mel Siff was still alive. Francis was still posting shit.
Yeah.
There's nobody taking their place.
Yeah.
And I feel, and I'm not saying that I am that. All I'm saying is, here's the shit. You want to learn it, great, and I will be more than happy to help you along that journey.
You make a good point though, because they were hard to find. These references were hard to find.
Very.
And
how many hours did I spend digging on your on your floor?
Well, I'm just saying the Verkhoshansky forum. I mean, all those things were hard to find. SIF's mailing list, all those different things were hard to find, and the information was it was gold.
Yeah.
And
a lot of that was at the time the internet was pretty new.
Yeah.
So it wasn't as easy to navigate around. And a lot of the real information that I feel was crucial for us to understanding athleticism and performance never got put on the internet. It almost protected itself.
In a way.
And that's good in certain ways.
In some ways it's not.
Some ways it's bad.
Some ways it's bad because it's, everything's a microculture now, so it's just sound bites to be able to come out. And the other thing that, at least for me with Mel and couple of the other people you mentioned, they push back on you. Like if you said something, they would push back on you. And like if it was Charles, it was just to be a dick. But but it made you think. Yeah. And I think we were missing that too. Yeah. That people just bluntly putting stuff out.
I think
there.
it's hard because I even run into the same situation. Like people will push back on me, and I get I get way less defensive on it now than I used to because I'm just like, look, I'm putting you out the information. You don't want to use it.
They're not doing it for the same reasons. It's different.
Yeah.
Like back then they were doing it because they wanted to hear more from you. Right. Or saw a hole in your argument and wanted you to see the argument. It was not done disrespectfully.
Right. Now, today, it's like they don't care that they're learning anything from the discussion. They just want to bust your balls.
Yeah. And those are just fucking, you just ignore those people.
Exactly.
You know, but then it was like, it would be like, okay, fuck, I got to think about this. Right. And either the delivery was wrong or this was wrong. And then you'd put it out there. Then either they got it or you were wrong. And then they would tell you why you're wrong. And you're like, okay, interesting. Different concept, you know.
Yeah, I think nobody's on the internet now is very seldom to learn. They're there to defend whatever they think is right at that time. And for me, if somebody brings a hole out in my stuff but doesn't want it, I mean, you can go back and look. If somebody asks me an educated question and I feel that it deserves my attention, I'm pretty good with it. You ask me something stupid, you're fucking paying for that answer. Because I'm tired of dealing with that fucking shit. I don't get to call Serrano and be, hey, can I talk shit with you for 5 minutes and tell you you're a dumbass? No, I'm going to charge you.
I'm just laughing because for fucking decades now I've been telling you just ignore this shit. And you're like, fuck these people.
No, so now instead of ignoring it, I just make money on it. You know what I mean?
Engagement's engagement.
Exactly.
Anything else that you want to bring up?
Anything from you?
No, man, it's fucking great having you out. Where do you want people to go to we have all your links in the description.
Sure.
But the weird thing now is like Threads just came out. Like it's a new fucking thing.
What's
for
that?
us.
Threads is like what we used to wear.
It's like Twitter for fucking Instagram. You'll be on it tomorrow, I'm sure.
Shit.
You'll get a thing. But if to get the most updated shit of what you're doing, would it be your Instagram?
Yeah, Instagram is day to day.
Yeah.
The membership site is the massive project. It's kind of like what we're doing sitting down now, but in an isolated area. So I have a fucking like 2-hour video on winning warmups alone, explaining everything and what I learned, sample exercises, how to find muscle weaknesses. That's a really good seller on there. I just did a deadlift tutorial on how to deadlift smart to get strong, but also keep your mileage down. I actually made that because I'm helping Stone Cold Steve Austin with his workouts, and I'm trying to teach him to train smarter because he's
fucked up,
old school, and
beat up
real bad. I'm like, you can't train like that anymore. You have to do it like this. And so part of that bike ride was hanging out with him for a day and a half at his place, and I'm looking at his gym, and once he saw me one-on-one, we talk a lot on the phone, but once he saw me and then we're talking eye to eye, it was a completely different scenario. So I'm not full of shit. Like, this motherfucker is legit, right? So that's been interesting, having him on coaching and getting videos of him training and fixing him, because like, I looked up to him as a kid. But going on, and then that's the membership site's very in tune education, because I started that because of the book, not because I knew when I was going to write the book, but I'm like, I want people to go to a place where it's a tight membership community that they can really go in depth on all these topics, and I can shoot the videos on them and then just not throw them out on YouTube and just Hail Mary them.
Now, is that through Winning Strength?
Yeah. Okay. So you go winningstrength.com, you can get on the membership site. It's very affordable, and we do really high quality tutorial videos. So if you're a strength coach, a trainer, or you're just interested in training smarter, that is the bee's knees. Patreon I made so people could ask me questions. I could show them my personal workouts. It's a little more interactive. And then Train Heroic is for somebody that doesn't want the interaction, but literally wants to follow smarter workouts and have tutorial videos next to the exercises. So if more beginner setup, so they don't fuck shit up, but they can do conjugate smarter by seeing exactly what I'm saying instead of just getting a workout.
Okay.
So, we try to do it as much as we can with everybody. And then obviously the manuals are fucking gold. I know you have all of them. I do a lot of work on those to make sure that when people read them, they're like, fuck, I wasn't thinking of that.
Yeah. No, they are good.
So I try to do that as good as I can. A lot of the manuals will probably slowly go on the membership site so we can protect them a little more, because it just drives me fucking nuts when I go on there and I see my manuals for sale on another website. And I'm like, dude, I don't charge a ton for these. Like, that should be 100% illegal. Like, I can't take something you make, copy it, and not get in trouble. But for some reason, PDF files are free game. Yeah,
it seems to be. I mean, for a long time, I was spending almost an hour a day going out, filling out takedown requests, which is just fucking insane. And then it's like, fuck it,
Yeah, I know. And like I said, I'm really here to help people. The only reason I try to keep some of my shit behind a paywall is just to conserve my time. as you well know, running a business, if I was literally answering every fucking question that nobody wanted to put any value in, I'd be on Instagram 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
I can't do that.
Yeah.
I got firemen to take care of. I got online coaching to take care of. So for me, I price that at a point that I feel it makes people not worth my time, but my energy is worth their time, or however you want to look at it. So again, we try to make that as good as possible. Winning Strength has all the links to all that.
All right, cool. Thank you for coming out. It won't be the last time. You'll be out again, definitely when the book comes, for sure, maybe before. Thank you guys for listening. We're done.